The year 2025 represented an extraordinary period for the field of archaeology. Newly discovered ancient temple structures emerged within the dense rainforests of Southeast Asia. Forgotten urban settlements were charted below the Amazonian tree cover. Furthermore, in Tanzania, investigators recognized bone implements dating to 1.5 million years in age, representing the most ancient such tools ever uncovered. When integrated with advances in laser scanning, genetic material examination, and artificial intelligence-assisted textual reconstruction, researchers gained the capacity to examine history with an unprecedented degree of accuracy. Therefore, prepare yourself as we explore the 23 most astonishing, pioneering, and profoundly unusual findings from this year. Our journey includes vanished metropolises, sealed burial chambers, perplexing objects, and biological enigmas that reconfigure the narrative of humanity. So, procure a refreshment, make yourself at ease, and allow the external environment to recede for a time. It has been a phenomenal year for historical inquiry, and we have much to reveal collectively. Prior to commencing, please ensure you subscribe for additional content on ancient secrets and archaeological explorations each and every week. Now we shall begin. Beneath the looming presence of Mount Vesuvius, the ruins of Pompeii have gradually yielded their concealed truths for almost 3 centuries. We have traversed its thoroughfares, stepped into its commercial establishments, and observed the plaster recreations of its last inhabitants. It is a common assumption that Pompeii possesses no further revelations, that every painted wall and every tiled floor has been thoroughly examined. However, in April of the year 2025, archaeologists laboring within a freshly unearthed area designated as Region 9 discovered a chamber that captivated global attention. This was a dining hall, yet it bore no resemblance to any other discovered within the city. The walls were not adorned with the brilliant Pompeian red or the cheerful yellows customary to Roman eating spaces. They were painted completely black. This was the Chamber of Black. It is an environment of deep, almost Gothic elegance conceived for nocturnal use. The archaeological team, guided by park director Gabriel Zuchtriegel, understood instantly that the selection of colors served a functional purpose alongside an artistic one. The black surface was designed to conceal the residue and smoke produced by the oil lamps that would have illuminated the room during evening banquets. Yet it also fulfilled a theatrical role. Against the backdrop of absolute black, the Roman artisans painted scenes of vivid hue and powerful sentiment. The frescoes portray figures from the Trojan War, but not the expected depictions of combat. Instead, they concentrate on instants of silent strain and consequential decisions. On one wall, we observe Helen of Troy encountering Paris, the Prince of Troy. This is the moment preceding the abduction or the elopement that would summon 1,000 vessels and ruin a civilization. The expression on Helen's face is contemplative, nearly uncertain. She is not a passive instrument, but a woman considering her fate. On a separate wall is Cassandra, the Trojan prophetess cursed by the god Apollo to foresee the future yet never be heeded. She sits with the deity, her countenance darkened by the awareness of the calamity approaching her city. It is a deeply evocative image to discover in Pompeii, a city that was itself existing on precarious time, disregarding the tremors that foretold its own ruin. The craftsmanship is extraordinary. The human forms are rendered with a degree of realism and emotional complexity uncommon in Roman artwork. The gazes of the characters appear to follow the observer. The intricacies of their attire and ornaments are executed with fine brushwork that would have glimmered in the light of torches. Yet the Chamber of Black represents more than a mere art display. It permits us to reconstruct the sensory atmosphere of a Roman feast. This was a space created for the privileged class. We can envision the reclining couches arranged in a horseshoe pattern, draped with fabrics of purple. We can detect the scent of lamp oil and seasoned wine. We can hear the murmur of discussion. The selection of mythological themes was deliberate. In Roman dining tradition, the artwork upon the walls served to provoke discourse. Guests would contemplate Helen and Paris and debate concepts of affection and destiny. Was Helen culpable? Was Paris a champion or a simpleton? They would observe Cassandra and converse about the weight of foresight. The room functioned as an intellectual arena, a location where the affluent could exhibit their learning and their refinement. The floor of the chamber is equally remarkable. It is laid with an immaculate white mosaic, creating a sharp opposition to the black walls. The resulting impression would have been arresting. Guests would have walked upon a surface of white, encircled by the somber emptiness of the walls, while the mythological figures hovered in the lamplight like apparitions. The excavation also brought to light the practical realities underpinning this luxury. Next to the Chamber of Black was a service courtyard containing a stairway ascending to an upper level. Underneath these stairs, archaeologists located a heap of building supplies. This included blocks of tufa stone, sacks of lime, and piles of roofing tiles. This verifies that the residence was undergoing improvements at the time of the volcanic eruption. The proprietor, probably a prosperous political figure or merchant, was investing in his estate, modernizing his home with contemporary artistic styles. He was making plans for the future. The laborers had likely just set aside their instruments for the day when the mountain detonated. This context renders the Chamber of Black even more deeply moving. It captures the exact instant when activity ceased. The frescoes are in pristine condition because they were never weathered by the passage of years. They were appreciated for perhaps only a few weeks or months prior to their entombment. The individuals who dined within this space were not so dissimilar from us. They assembled with companions. They consumed wine. They conversed about the narratives that held significance for them, endeavoring to comprehend the human experience. They sat in their refined Chamber of Black, encircled by portrayals of Troy's annihilation, discussing the collapse of ancient cities, entirely oblivious that their own city was on the verge of disappearing. We frequently refer to the overwhelming majority of human history as the Stone Age. This designation represents a bias born from what endures. Stone is resilient. It survives exposure to wind and rain and the immense pressure of accumulating sediment across millions of years. However, the actual reality of our forebears was likely far more varied. They inhabited a world comprised of wood, leather, plant fiber, and bone. Because these organic substances decompose, we are often presented with a distorted image of antiquity, where early humans appear rudimentary and confined to simply striking rocks together. In the year 2025, two major findings on two separate continents compelled us to reconsider the sophistication of the ancient intellect. One discovery in Tanzania pushed the chronology of complex tool production back by hundreds of thousands of years. The other, located in New Mexico, contested our comprehension of how the earliest Americans inhabited an evolving terrain. Both revelations demonstrate that intelligence and inventive capacity are embedded much more profoundly in our history than the stone record implies. The initial discovery originates from the cradle of humankind in East Africa. In a study published in the scientific journal Nature, a team of paleoanthropologists announced the identification of the most ancient human-fashioned bone tools ever documented. These artifacts were located within the fossil-bearing layers of Tanzania and date back an astonishing 1.5 million years. This temporal marker is significant because it firmly situates the tools within the era of Homo erectus and potentially Paranthropus boisei. These were not modern humans. They were early hominins with brains substantially smaller than our own. Yet, the analysis of these bone fragments reveals a degree of deliberate intent and comprehension of material properties that is strikingly modern. The working bone is fundamentally distinct from the flaking stone. Stone is isotropic, meaning it fractures in predictable conchoidal patterns regardless of the direction of applied force. Bone is anisotropic. It possesses a grain. It has density variations between the hard outer cortical layer and the porous interior. To shape it demands an entirely different set of motor skills and a sophisticated understanding of the material's structural characteristics. The tools detailed in the 2025 study were not merely shattered pieces utilized as convenient scrapers. They were intentionally formed. The makers selected specific bones from large mammals and employed stone tools to strip away flesh and periosteum. They then ground the bone against abrasive rocks to create defined shapes, which included barbed points and smoothed spatulas. The existence of barbed points from 1.5 million years ago is particularly transformative. It suggests the development of complex projectile technology far earlier than previously accepted. A barbed point is engineered to remain embedded in a wound. This implies a specific hunting strategy, likely targeting fish or small game, where securing the prey is as crucial as dispatching it. This contradicts the outdated perception of Homo erectus as a simple scavenger reliant on brute strength and chance. It portrays a species that was engineering solutions to specific problems, utilizing the optimal materials at their disposal. The study also employed microscopic wear pattern analysis to ascertain how the tools were used. The configurations of striations on the bone surfaces indicate they were utilized for a variety of tasks, including excavating for tubers and processing plant materials. This points to a broad and adaptable toolkit. These early ancestors were not merely surviving. They were optimizing the efficiency of their surroundings by transforming the remnants of their hunts into the technology required to procure their subsequent meal. While the finds in Tanzania illuminate the profound antiquity of human engineering, a discovery in the American Southwest has cast new illumination on how humans mastered the New World. For decades, the archaeology of North America was governed by the Clovis First model, which proposed human arrival approximately 13,000 years ago. That model has been dismantled in recent years by locations such as White Sands, where human footprints were dated to 23,000 years ago. However, while we knew people were present, we understood very little about their way of life. In 2025, archaeologists working at the Gypsum Overlook site within the Tularosa Basin of New Mexico announced the discovery of the most anciently dated structures in the American Southwest. The site dates to 8,800 years ago, placing it within the early Archaic period. This was an epoch of immense environmental change. The Ice Age had concluded. The megafauna were extinct. The fertile wetlands of the Tularosa Basin were commencing their transformation into the arid dune fields visible today. The conventional perspective of this period is one of high mobility. We presumed people were perpetually nomadic, pursuing small game and seasonal flora, leaving behind nothing more than hearths and stone debris. Gypsum Overlook complicates that narrative. The team unearthed the remnants of substantial architectural features. These were not temporary windbreaks assembled for a single evening. They were meticulously constructed shelters. The builders excavated shallow basins into the earth to create a semi-subterranean floor, which provides natural insulation against the desert heat and the chill of night. Around the perimeter of these basins, the archaeologists identified post holes indicating a robust superstructure fashioned from wood and brush. Inside these structures, the team located distinct thermal features or hearths. These were not open campfires. They were engineered heating elements. The builders employed specific types of stone to line the pits, creating a thermal mass that would radiate warmth long after the flames subsided. This demonstrates a clear grasp of thermodynamics and a desire for comfort and efficiency within a demanding landscape. The presence of these structures from 8,800 years ago suggests a level of sedentism not previously believed to exist at that time. It implies these early archaic people were not wandering aimlessly across the terrain. They were anchored to specific locations. They invested labor and resources into building dwellings intended to endure for weeks or even months. This alters our understanding of the social organization of the first Americans. Constructing permanent structures requires forethought. It necessitates the collection of materials that may not be immediately accessible. It suggests a society that was coordinating its labor and planning for its future. The people of Gypsum Overlook were not merely reacting to their environment, they were modifying it to suit their needs. The site also produced a wealth of artifacts, including grinding stones and projectile points that form a connective link between the Paleo-Indian hunters and the later archaic foragers. The collection reveals a culture in transition, adapting its technology to a changing world. As the great beasts vanished and the lakes receded, they did not just survive, they settled. They built roofs over their heads and engineered their hearths to keep their families warm. When we consider these two discoveries together, they narrate a unified story of human resilience and intellect. In Tanzania, 1.5 million years ago, our distant predecessors were already mastering the complex physics of bone to create specialized implements. In New Mexico, 8,800 years ago, our more direct ancestors were mastering the architecture of the desert to create enduring homes. Both findings contest the notion that ancient humans were simple or primitive. They prove that innovation is not a modern invention. It is our most ancient survival trait. Whether it was shaping a femur into a harpoon or excavating a foundation into the desert floor, the impulse to engineer a superior solution to the challenges of survival has perpetually been the defining characteristic of our lineage. The Gypsum Overlook site is presently being preserved, and further analysis of the floor surfaces is planned for the 2026 field season. Archaeologists hope to locate microscopic traces of pollen and starch, which would inform us precisely what these people were consuming and processing inside their dwellings. In Tanzania, the search continues for additional bone tools as researchers re-examine old collections from Olduvai Gorge to determine if other artifacts were overlooked by prior generations who were exclusively seeking stone. These discoveries function as a reminder that the archaeological record is prejudiced. It favors the hard and the heavy. Yet the true history of humanity is likely inscribed in the materials that have disappeared. The bone tools and the brush huts are the phantoms of our ingenuity, demonstrating that we have always been makers, builders, and problem solvers long before we ever recorded it. A fundamental issue exists within the discipline of archaeology regarding the preservation of materials. The overwhelming portion of human history was constructed from substances that decay. Wood, leather, plant fibers, and animal skins deteriorate rapidly when subjected to natural forces. This leaves behind only the hard, enduring objects such as stone and bone. This creates a distorted perception of antiquity, where early societies appear less complex than they truly were, because approximately 90% of their technological inventory has disappeared. We observe the arrowheads, but not the bows. We see the stone axes, but not the wooden handles or the bindings used to secure them. However, in November of the year 2025, a discovery in the far northern region of Queensland, Australia, provided an exceptionally rare view into that absent world. A research team led by archaeologists from the University of Western Australia, working in close partnership with the traditional custodians, the Kuku-Wara people, excavated a modest rock shelter known as Windmill Way. The site is situated within the rough sandstone terrain of the Cape York Peninsula. It is a dry, sheltered environment, protected from rainfall and the intense tropical sunlight by a substantial rock overhang. This specific microclimate transformed the cave into a temporal repository. As the team carefully examined the sandy floor of the shelter, they uncovered more than just stone fragments or charcoal remnants. They discovered plant fiber. In total, they recovered more than 500 fragments of ancient textiles. This constitutes the most extensive collection of ancient fiber artifacts ever discovered in Australia. Radiocarbon dating established the age of the oldest pieces at approximately 1,700 years, with evidence of continuous use at the site extending right up to the late 19th century. Finding a single length of cord nearly 2,000 years old is extraordinary. Discovering 500 individual pieces constitutes a profound revelation. In the majority of archaeological contexts, organic materials of this nature decompose within mere decades. Here, they survived for millennia. The assemblage includes pieces of dilly bags, which are woven carrying containers essential for daily existence. These bags function to transport food, tools, and personal items, serving as the backpacks and pockets of the ancient world. The weaving is detailed and varied, demonstrating a command of different techniques for distinct purposes. Some were tightly woven to contain small seeds or grains, while others featured a more open weave designed to carry larger items such as tubers or shellfish. The team also uncovered fishing nets, binding cords, and even what appeared to be fragments of ceremonial objects. The sheer quantity of material enables archaeologists to reconstruct the soft technology of the Aboriginal people with remarkable precision. Microscopic analysis of the fibers revealed a sophisticated production process. The makers utilized specific plant species, harvesting the bark or leaves, processing them, and twisting them into consistently strong strings. This was not a casual activity. It demanded profound botanical knowledge to select the correct plants at the optimal time of year, along with skilled hands to transform the raw material into durable cordage. The knots employed in the nets are identical to those used by contemporary fishermen, a testament to a technology that was perfected millennia ago and never required improvement. This discovery contests the often stone-centric perspective of Aboriginal history. For a considerable time, archaeology in Australia concentrated heavily on stone implements, scrapers, points, and axes, because those were the objects that endured. This fostered an image of a culture defined primarily by stone. However, Windmill Way demonstrates that the reality was substantially more abundant. Stone tools were significant, but they constituted just one component of a comprehensive toolkit. The fiber artifacts reveal the complexity of daily life. These nets caught the fish that nourished families. These bags transported the yams and the tools. The cordage bound spearheads to their shafts. Without this soft technology, the hard stone tools would have been ineffective. The techniques used to craft the 1,700-year-old cordage are the same techniques practiced by Kuku-Wara elders in the present day. It is a tangible connection to deep time, proving this knowledge has been transmitted through roughly 80 generations without interruption. It reveals a culture that was stable, highly adapted, and extraordinarily resilient. Yet the Windmill Way site also narrates a story of profound disruption. The timeline of the artifact ceases abruptly around the year 1874. This date coincides with the onset of the Palmer River gold rush in the region. Thousands of European miners inundated the area, bringing with them violence, disease, and displacement. The rock shelter, which had served as a safe haven and a workspace for nearly 2 millennia, was suddenly forsaken. Among the final layers of the deposit, archaeologists found 2 European objects, a piece of hooked wire and a strip of red cloth. These were likely traded or scavenged items, the initial indicators of a new world that would ultimately compel the people of Windmill Way to abandon their home. The desertion of the site crystallizes that moment of contact in time. The nets were left incomplete. The bags were dropped. The shelter transitioned from a living space into a museum of memory. It suggests a sudden departure, an instant when the traditional rhythms of life were fractured by external forces. For the Kukuwara people, this find is more than mere archaeology. It is a confirmation of their oral history and a physical link to the ancestors who sat within that same cave, twisting fiber into string, sustaining a way of life that persisted for thousands of years before the gold rush concluded it. As these artifacts undergo conservation and further study, they will establish a new foundational understanding of indigenous technology. This discovery compels us to observe every rock shelter and cave with renewed perspective, prompting us to wonder what other fragile histories might be waiting within the dry soil, concealed from the rain and the sun. Occasionally, the most perplexing finds in archaeology are not those we cannot locate, but those we discover, hold in our palms, and still cannot comprehend. In the year 2025, a volunteer archaeology society in the small village of Norton Disney, located in Lincolnshire, England, uncovered an object that has become the ultimate enigma of the Roman era. They were digging a trench within a muddy field, searching for pottery fragments and coins when a volunteer struck something solid. It was not a rock, it was metal. As they gently cleared away the soil, a form emerged that resembled something from a work of speculative fiction, a Roman dodecahedron. A dodecahedron is a geometric form possessing 12 pentagonal faces. This specific object is fabricated from a copper alloy and is approximately the size of a grapefruit. Each of its 12 faces features a circular opening of a different width, and each corner is adorned with a small spherical protrusion. It is hollow, intricate, and exquisitely manufactured. The Norton Disney specimen is noteworthy due to its dimensions and state. It is among the largest ever discovered in Britain, and it is impeccably preserved, with no damage or decay obscuring its fine details. It appears as though it could have been molded just yesterday. However, the true narrative is not the object itself. It is the unresolved questions that envelop it. This is not the first dodecahedron we have encountered. There are approximately 130 known examples from across the Roman Empire, predominantly clustered in the northwestern provinces of Gaul, Germany, and Britain. They have been discovered within military encampments, inside temples, among caches of coins, and in riverbeds. And yet, within the entire body of Roman literature, among all the millions of words written by historians, engineers, soldiers, and poets, there exists not a single reference to them. We do not know what they were called, and we do not know their function. The Norton Disney discovery has reignited a debate that has persisted for 200 years. What is this item? The hypotheses range from the pragmatic to the spiritual, and every single one contains a critical weakness. One theory proposes it was a rangefinder or a measuring instrument for the Roman military. However, the openings on the dodecahedrons are not uniform. Every specimen is unique, which means a measuring device that provides a different result depending on which one you select is entirely ineffective. Another theory suggests it was a gauge for calibrating water conduits or coins, but again, the absence of standardization undermines this idea. Roman engineering was fixated on exactness. They would not employ a tool with such significant variation. Some have proposed it was a knitting tool for crafting gloves, with yarn wound around the knobs. While modern textile artisans have demonstrated this is technically feasible, it seems improbable that such a complex, high-status bronze object would be created for such an ordinary chore, particularly when simple wood would suffice. The context of the discovery at Norton Disney offers a fresh clue. The object was found in a pit filled with Roman pottery dating to the 3rd or 4th century AD, but it was not merely discarded. It appeared to have been intentionally deposited. This has led researchers to favor the notion that it was a religious or ceremonial object. In the Roman world, especially in the provinces where Celtic and Roman customs intermingled, magic and superstition were woven into daily life. The dodecahedrons might have been divination instruments used for casting lots or determining the future based on which face landed upward. The 12 sides could correspond to the signs of the zodiac, though none of the objects bear zodiacal symbols. Alternatively, perhaps they were simply masterworks, objects created by metal workers to display their skill, a kind of portfolio piece demonstrating their ability to cast complex geometric shapes. Yet if that were true, why bury them in pits? The Norton Disney dodecahedron underwent X-ray fluorescence analysis in 2025. This revealed a composition of 75% copper, 7% tin, and 18% lead. This is a standard Roman bronze alloy, but the elevated lead content would have made the molten metal flow more readily, which is essential for filling a detailed mold. The quality of the craftsmanship is indisputable. It was a costly object, valuable for its metal content alone. The fact that its owner chose to enter it rather than melt it down for scrap implies it possessed a power or meaning that exceeded its material worth. The object currently serves as the central attraction of an exhibition at the University of Nottingham, where crowds have gathered to view it. There is something profoundly captivating about an object that resists explanation. We exist in an age where we demand answers. We can sequence the DNA of an extinct lineage and map a city concealed beneath jungle foliage, yet we cannot determine the purpose of this massive bronze. It reminds us that, despite all our technology, the past remains a foreign land. There are cultural concepts, rituals, and tools that have vanished so completely we lack even the vocabulary to describe them. The dodecahedron rests in its glass display case, a perfect geometric puzzle, challenging us to acknowledge that there are some things we simply do not know. Was it a weapon, a toy, a sacred object, or something so commonplace and obvious to a Roman that they never thought to record it, like a door handle or a fastener? Until we find one accompanied by an instruction manual or a depiction of someone using it, the Norton Disney dodecahedron will remain the ultimate unsolvable riddle of archaeology. It is a beautiful, frustrating emblem of the boundaries of our understanding. While certain archaeological findings astonish us through their immense size, like the vast urban complexes of the Amazon or the sunken vessels of the deep sea, others enthrall us through their profound intimacy. In the year 2025, a discovery within the Caucasus Mountains demonstrated that occasionally the most diminutive objects convey the most significant narratives. A cooperative team of Azerbaijani and Japanese archaeologists operating within the Kazakh district of western Azerbaijan uncovered a very small stone figure that has fundamentally altered the historical understanding of art in this region. The discovery occurred within Damjili Cave, a location that has served as a human habitation site for thousands of years. Situated at the foothills of the Ave Mountain, the cave provides a natural shelter overlooking a river valley, an ideal location for early hunter-gatherer communities to establish camp. Archaeologists have excavated this site for many years, meticulously sorting through strata of Neolithic and Mesolithic earth, unearthing stone implements, animal remains, and the charcoal remnants of ancient hearths. However, in April of 2025, Within a layer dated to between 6,400 and 6,100 years before the Common Era, they discovered something distinct. It was a small, sculpted stone object, no larger than the palm of a human hand. As the surrounding soil was carefully brushed aside, a distinct form became visible. It was a representation of a human body. This artifact is linked to the early Shomu-tape culture, a local Neolithic society that was just beginning to experiment with agricultural practices and a more settled existence. The figure is carved from a type of soft local stone. It portrays a stylized human form, solid in shape and carefully worked. Like numerous prehistoric figures from this era, it lacks facial features. The head is a simple, rounded mass without defined eyes, a nose, or a mouth. The artisan's focus was not on individual identity, but on the physical body itself. This absence of a face connects the Shomu-tape figure to an enormous ancient tradition that extends across the Eurasian continent. For tens of thousands of years, from the Ice Age Venus figurines of Europe to the seated female representations of Ayatollah in Turkey, early human beings crafted similar images. They are frequently interpreted as symbols of fertility, as mother goddesses, or as depictions of ancestral spirits. The Shomu-tape discovery is important because it occupies a geographical void. We possess many examples of this artistic form from Europe and the Near East. Yet the Caucasus region, which serves as a bridge between these two areas, has produced very few. This figure confirms that the people of the Shomu-tape culture were participants in this broader symbolic universe. They shared a common visual language with cultures situated thousands of miles away, engaging in a network of ideas and beliefs that spanned the entire continent. Microscopic examination of the figure revealed minute traces of red ochre upon its surface. This indicates it was originally painted or rubbed with pigment, perhaps to give it the hue of life or of blood. Red ochre is a substance deeply connected to ritual and burial practices in the ancient world, further supporting the notion that this object served a spiritual function. What was its precise use? We can only theorize. Was it a talisman held during childbirth? A votive offering placed within a shrine to secure a bountiful harvest? Or perhaps it was a toy or an instructional tool. The context of the discovery, inside a cave utilized as a seasonal encampment, suggests it was a portable object. It was something that could be carried within a pouch and positioned wherever the group paused for the night. The discovery also illuminates the Shomu-tape culture itself. These were people in a state of transition. They were moving away from the purely nomadic hunter-gatherer lifestyle of the Mesolithic period and adopting the new technologies of the Neolithic era, namely farming and animal husbandry. This was an epoch of profound social transformation. As communities began to establish permanent settlements, their relationship with the land, the seasons, and with one another underwent a fundamental shift. Artistic expressions like this figure may have served as a method to navigate that change, a tangible emblem of continuity within a world in flux. Discovering art from this period is uncommon because so much of it was likely fabricated from perishable materials like wood, clay, or plant fibers that have decomposed over time. A stone carving represents a deliberate choice for permanence. The artisan who created this object more than 8,000 years ago intended for it to endure. They succeeded. The figure is small, silent, and faceless, yet it connects us directly to the individual who sat beside a fire in Damgili Cave 8 millennia ago, shaping a piece of stone into a form that we, today, can still recognize and understand. In November of the year 2025, archaeologists associated with the Budapest History Museum made a discovery that provided an exceptionally rare, undisturbed view into the ancient world. During an excavation at a site located within the Buda district of Budapest, They unearthed a limestone sarcophagus dating to the 3rd century of the Common Era. This region was formerly part of Aquincum, a significant Roman settlement and military garrison situated along the Danube River frontier. The city functioned as the capital of the province known as Pannonia Inferior, a crucial defensive line against tribal groups to the north. What rendered this find truly extraordinary was its state of preservation. The majority of Roman sarcophagi discovered in this area were plundered many centuries ago, their lids forced open by tomb raiders searching for gold or other precious metals. However, this burial chamber was found completely undisturbed. The massive stone lid remained securely in position, fastened by iron clamps that had rusted but never fractured. Even more significantly, the joint where the lid met the base was sealed with a substantial layer of lead. This created an airtight enclosure that had safeguarded the interior contents for over 1,700 years. The excavation team, directed by archaeologists Gabriela Fuzes and Gergely Satlas, understood they had encountered a temporal capsule. The lead seal had prevented water, air, and insects from entering the coffin, dramatically slowing the decomposition of organic materials that typically vanish within decades. When they meticulously raised the lid, they were presented with a scene unseen since the funeral rites occurred in the late Roman period. Inside rested the complete skeletal remains of a young woman. Based on the size of her bones and the accompanying burial items, she was likely a member of the wealthy aristocratic class who resided in the civilian town that developed around the legionary fortress. The condition inside the sarcophagus was astonishing. A layer of silt had accumulated at the bottom, probably from groundwater penetrating microscopic fissures over millennia, yet the objects arranged around the body remained in their original positions. Placed near her head were 2 glass vessels known as unguentaria. In most archaeological excavations, Roman glass is recovered shattered into countless iridescent fragments, crushed by the immense pressure of overlying soil. These vessels were perfectly intact. They likely contained perfumed oils or ointments, part of the Roman funerary practice where the deceased was anointed before burial. The fact they survived unbroken suggests the coffin was treated with the utmost care during its interment. Around the woman's neck and wrists, the team discovered items of gold jewelry. This included a necklace and bracelets that would have been stylish during the 3rd century, clearly indicating her elevated social status. Close to her skull, they found a bone hairpin, an accessory used to secure the intricate hairstyles favored by Roman women of that era. These personal effects suggest she was attired in her finest clothing for burial, intended to enter the afterlife while maintaining her societal position. The most significant scientific discovery, however, was the trace evidence of textiles. The lead seal had fostered an environment where remnants of fabric could endure. Archaeologists identified threads of gold woven into a material that had otherwise decayed. This indicates she was buried wearing a garment of extraordinary value, likely a tunic made of silk or fine wool, embellished with gold embroidery. Clothing of this nature would have represented an extreme luxury in a frontier province, imported at great expense from the eastern Mediterranean, or even from China via the Silk Road networks. The sarcophagus itself narrates a story about the economy of Aquincum. It was carved from local limestone, yet the craftsmanship was of superior quality. The ability of her family to commission a custom-made stone coffin, rather than reuse an older one, a common practice in the resource-constrained 4th century, signifies considerable wealth. The application of the lead sealing represented an additional cost, a deliberate attempt to protect the body from environmental factors. Aquincum during the 3rd and 4th centuries was a place of stark contrasts. It was a flourishing urban center complete with amphitheaters, public baths, and hypocaust heating systems, enjoying the amenities of Roman civilization. Yet, it was also a militarized zone under constant threat from the Quadi and Sarmatian tribes residing just across the river. The existence of such an opulent burial suggests that, despite the looming instability, the elite class preserved a high standard of living and continued to observe traditional Roman burial customs with strict adherence. The team also recovered 140 bronze coins from within the sarcophagus. This detail is crucial for precisely dating the burial. In Roman tradition, a single coin was often placed in the mouth of the deceased as payment to Charon, the ferryman who conveyed souls across the river Styx. The considerable quantity of coins found here is unusual and may represent a purse buried alongside her, or a specific local variation of the ritual intended to guarantee her safe passage to the underworld. The skeletal remains are now undergoing comprehensive analysis. Osteologists will examine the bones to determine her precise age, height, and potential cause of death. Isotopic analysis of her teeth will reveal her geographic origins during childhood. This will ascertain whether she was a local Pannonian native who married into the Roman administrative class, or an immigrant from Italy, Gaul, or Syria who traveled across the empire's vast road network to end her life on the Danube frontier. Residue analysis conducted on the glass vessels could identify the specific oils used in her funeral rites. We may learn if she was anointed with frankincense from Arabia, myrrh from Africa, or rose oil from the gardens of Italy. These chemical signatures will aid in reconstructing the sensory experience of a Roman funeral, adding a layer of detail that written texts and statues cannot provide. This discovery distinguishes itself in a year of substantial archaeological finds due to its profound intimacy. While laser surveys reveal the grand scale of civilizations, a sealed sarcophagus reveals the individual. It provides a precise snapshot of a specific moment in time, a funeral conducted on the outermost edge of the empire, preserved through the durability of stone and lead. As these artifacts are conserved and studied, they will be added to the collection of the Aquincum Museum, offering a tangible connection to the people who once walked the streets of Budapest when it was a Roman town. For many centuries, historians have sought the truth behind the legendary civilization of Tartessos. Situated in what is now the southern region of Spain, this society represented the first powerful organized state in the Western Mediterranean. Ancient Greek writers spoke of it with profound respect. The historian Herodotus described it as a kingdom of extraordinary affluence, a location where silver was so abundant that ships utilized it for their anchors. It functioned as a crucial commercial partner, linking the Atlantic sphere to the ancient civilizations of the Near East. Yet, despite its renown in antiquity, Tartessos has always remained a spectral presence. It vanished from historical documentation approximately 2,500 years ago, disappearing with such thoroughness that some academics have proposed it served as the inspiration for Plato's narrative of Atlantis. For archaeologists, the primary frustration extended beyond the absence of its cities. It was that its people remained utterly unseen. Until this current year, a widely accepted principle held that Tartessian culture was aniconic. This term signifies they did not depict their deities or their populace in human form. While their neighboring civilizations, the Phoenicians and the Greeks, crafted statues and painted portraits, the Tartessians appeared to represent the divine solely through abstract stones or sacred geometric forms. We possessed their ornamental jewelry and their weapons, but we had no conception of their physical appearance. In the year 2025, that profound silence was definitively broken. Excavations at the site of Casas del Turuilo, located within the province of Badajoz, revealed the first sculpted human visages belonging to Tartessian culture. The discovery was made by a research team from the Spanish National Research Council, led by archaeologists Esther Rodriguez and Sebastian Celestino. They were investigating the ruins of an immense, two-story structure made of adobe that served as a sanctuary or a palace. Buried within the debris from the site's final destruction, they uncovered 5 stone busts. These were not primitive or stylized representations. They were sophisticated, naturalistic portraits, carved with a level of artistry that rivals the finest works of Greece or Etruria. The immediate impact of this discovery was profound. The aniconic theory, which had defined Tartessian studies for decades, was instantly invalidated. 2 of the busts portray women. They are adorned with elaborate, oversized earrings known as arquillas. These intricate gold artifacts are well known to archaeologists, having been discovered in Tartessian hoards previously. However, witnessing them carved upon a statue provides essential context. It demonstrates how they were worn and underscores the immense social status of the women depicted. These were likely representations of powerful female deities, perhaps a local interpretation of a goddess, or of high-ranking aristocratic women who served within the religious cult. A third bust depicts a warrior. He wears a helmet with a distinct crest, a piece of military equipment that matches bronze fragments discovered in other areas of the region. The degree of detail is exceptional. One can observe the texture of the hair and the specific cut of the clothing. These statues prove conclusively that the Tartessians possessed a highly developed tradition of stone sculpture that had, until now, been entirely erased from the archaeological record. The location of the find adds a somber dimension to the discovery. Casas del Teruelo was not gradually abandoned. It was the scene of a massive, deliberate ritual destruction. Within the courtyard of the building, archaeologists discovered the remains of a hecatomb, a mass sacrifice of animals. The skeletons of more than 50 horses, cattle, pigs, and dogs were found arranged upon the courtyard floor, some still positioned in pairs. This constituted an extraordinarily costly sacrificial act. Horses were valuable assets akin to the luxury vehicles of the ancient world. To slaughter so many simultaneously implies a ritual of supreme, desperate importance. Following the sacrifice, the entire structure was set ablaze and then intentionally buried beneath layers of clay. This act of ritual closure sealed the site perfectly. It created an environment devoid of oxygen, which preserved the wall plaster, the animal bones, and the stone faces of the deities. The discovery of these faces compels a fundamental re-evaluation of Tartessus's relationship with the wider ancient world. The artistic style demonstrates clear influence from the Eastern Mediterranean. The almond-shaped eyes and the treatment of the hair recall the artistic conventions of Phoenicia and archaic Greece. This confirms that Tartessos was not an isolated hinterland. It was a cosmopolitan hub where local Iberian traditions blended seamlessly with the aesthetics of the Eastern cultures. Yet the faces also possess a distinct local character. The heavy jewelry and the specific facial features do not appear strictly Greek or Phoenician. They appear indigenous. We are, at last, gazing upon the actual people of the Atlantic Bronze Age. This inevitably returns us to the Atlantis connection. While serious archaeologists generally avoid suggesting a direct link, the parallels between Tartessos and Plato's myth have always been difficult to disregard. Both were immensely wealthy civilizations situated beyond the Strait of Gibraltar. Both were rich in metal resources, and both disappeared suddenly. The excavation at Teruelo suggests the end of Tartessos was violent and possibly self-inflicted. The ritual destruction of the sanctuary implies a society in profound crisis. Perhaps they were confronting an invasion, a plague, or a climate catastrophe that devastated their economy. The decision to kill their most valuable animals, burn their temples, and bury their gods suggests a desperate attempt to appease the divine, or a scorched earth policy intended to prevent desecration by enemies. The 5 faces discovered this year likely represent merely the beginning. The site of Casas del Turuilo is vast, and only a small fraction has been excavated. The research team believes the building they are uncovering is just one component of a larger complex that may constitute the political center of the entire region. As the statues undergo restoration at the Archaeological Museum of Badajoz, a civilization considered faceless for 2 millennia has finally revealed its countenance. It turns out they were present all along, buried beneath the clay of the Spanish plains, waiting for us to excavate deeply enough to encounter them. Within the dense, verdant core of the pit and jungle, archaeologists have dedicated many decades to carefully uncovering the successive layers of Maya history. We have charted the great classic period metropolises such as Tikal and Calakmul, filled with admiration for their soaring pyramids and intricate dynastic conflicts. However, for an extended period, the era preceding these colossal achievements, known as the preclassic period, remained obscure. The prevailing assumption was that this was a time of smaller settlements and simpler constructions, a preliminary phase setting the stage for the main spectacle that would emerge 1,000 years later. Yet, in May of the year 2025, a collaborative team of Guatemalan and Slovak archaeologists announced a discovery that completely shattered that established timeline. Working deep within the unexplored forests of northern Guatemala, a mere 13 miles from the renowned ruins of Exacten, the team uncovered an enormous, integrated urban complex dating back nearly 3,000 years. This firmly places its origin within the Middle Preclassic period, around 800 years before the Common Era. According to traditional academic understanding, this was a time when Maya society was only just beginning to organize itself. The complex comprises 3 distinct cities, Los Alacranes, Petenitz, and Cambalam. These formed a previously unknown urban triad of immense power and sophistication. The scale of the construction is staggering. At Los Alacranes, the team discovered a ceremonial center spanning 6 square miles, anchored by pyramids and sanctuaries that rival the later classic period sites in their dimensions. One pyramid at Petnanitsa stands over 100 feet tall, its summit crowned with preserved chambers that still bear faint traces of red, white, and black murals painted 3 millennia ago. However, the true revolutionary aspect of this discovery is not the height of the temples. It is the evidence of advanced water management. At the site of Cambalam, the archaeologists encountered something entirely unprecedented in the pre-classic archaeological record: a sophisticated, stucco-lined canal system. This was not merely a simple drainage trench. It represented a feat of hydraulic engineering that indicates a complete mastery of the rainforest environment a full 1,000 years earlier than anyone had anticipated. The canal network extends for nearly 200 feet, channeling water from a massive reservoir situated atop a palace structure down through the architectural facade of the city. The channels were lined with plaster to prevent erosion and seepage, a technique that required the production of vast quantities of lime, a resource-intensive industrial process. The system appears designed to manage waste and drainage, maintaining cleanliness and sanitation within the elite precincts of the city during the torrential rainy seasons. This discovery fundamentally transforms our comprehension of Maya urban development. Managing water in the Pedane is a matter of survival. The region functions as a seasonal desert, flooding for 6 months and then drying out completely for the other 6. To establish a city here, a society must capture rainfall when it occurs, store it for the arid months, and simultaneously protect its structures from being washed away by the deluge. Until now, the consensus held that complex hydraulic systems, reservoirs, dams, filtration beds were innovations of the classic period, developed as populations surged in the first millennium of the Common Era. Yet the canals of Cambalam proved the Maya had solved this critical challenge by 800 years before the Common Era. They were actively reshaping their environment and managing complex infrastructure at a time when Rome was merely a collection of simple huts upon a hill. The cultural richness of the site matches its engineering prowess. At Los Alacranes, the team discovered two anthropomorphic sculptures depicting an ancestral couple, a man and a woman carved in stone. These figures likely represent the founding lineage of the city, providing early evidence of an ancestor worship cult that would form the bedrock of Maya religion for the next 2,000 years. They also uncovered an E-group astronomical complex, a specific arrangement of temples used to track the solstices and equinoxes. The presence of this observatory at such an early date confirms the Maya had already formalized their calendar and their cosmic observations. They were not merely farmers glancing at the sky. They were astronomers constructing monumental stone instruments to measure time. The sheer density of these sites, connected by raised causeways and sharing a unified architectural style, suggests a level of political centralization previously thought non-existent in the pre-classic period. These were not isolated, independent villages. They were constituent parts of a coordinated state. The urban triangle of Los Alacranes, Petenitsa, and Cambalam functioned as a single economic and political engine, controlling trade and religious practice in the northern Petan. This discovery compels us to reconsider the trajectory of civilization in the Americas. It suggests the classic Maya did not simply appear without precedent. They were the inheritors of a deep and sophisticated tradition of engineering and urban planning that stretched back into the earliest centuries of the first millennium before the Common Era. The jungles of Guatemala are often described as a green ocean, a vast expanse that consumes history. Yet, thanks to this new expedition, we now understand this ocean conceals leviathans. The builders of Cambalam and Los Alacranes were not primitive ancestors. They were master engineers who tamed the rainforest long before historical narratives granted them credit for it. As the team continues to map the canals and clear the temples, they are revealing the foundational blueprint of a civilization that was fully formed, powerful, and brilliant right at the very commencement of its story. As the desert sands shift once again, we turn our attention to a remarkable discovery made by the French Navy while scanning the sea floor. In March of the year 2025, during a routine survey of the seabed off the coast of Ramatuelle in southern France, their sonar equipment registered an anomaly. They were operating in the abyssal zone at a depth of nearly 8,400 feet, which is over 1.5 miles beneath the surface. At this extreme depth, the Mediterranean Sea is a realm of total darkness, crushing pressure, and near-freezing temperatures. It is an environment where biological processes slow dramatically and history becomes immobilized. The Navy deployed an autonomous underwater vehicle, named the Hugin, to investigate the contact. As the drone moved silently through the pitch-black water, its powerful lights illuminated something that should not have been present. It was not a natural rock formation or a modern shipping container lost from a cargo vessel. It was a wooden ship, sitting upright on the sediment as if it were still sailing across the ocean floor. This is the wreck now designated as Camarat 4. It is a merchant vessel from the 16th century, and it represents the deepest shipwreck ever discovered within French territorial waters. Finding a wooden shipwreck at such a depth is exceptionally rare. In shallower coastal waters, wood is rapidly consumed by shipworms and destroyed by storms or fishing trawlers. However, in the deep abyss, oxygen levels are significantly lower and wood-boring organisms are far less active. Consequently, this ship has been preserved in a state of suspended animation for 500 years. The images transmitted by the autonomous vehicle are hauntingly clear. The hull remains largely intact, its ribs and planking distinctly visible against the muddy sea. The masts have collapsed, likely having snapped during the vessel's violent descent, or having been slowly consumed by bacteria over the centuries, yet the primary structure remains coherent. We are observing a time capsule from the Renaissance period, a ship that sailed the same seas as the fleets of Suleiman the Magnificent and the navies of Spain and Venice. The 16th century was a pivotal era for global maritime trade. The Mediterranean Sea was no longer the undisputed center of the world, as Atlantic routes to the Americas and the passage around Africa to India were opening. Nevertheless, it remained a bustling commercial highway. Ships like Camerat IV were the essential workhorses of this economy, transporting grain, wine, oil, and textiles between the ports of France, Italy, Spain, and the Ottoman Empire. Preliminary analysis of the wreck suggests it was a medium-sized merchantman, perhaps measuring between 60 and 80 feet in length. Its location off the coast of Ramachul places it on a major historical trade route that followed the southern coast of France, linking the ports of Marseille and Toulon with Genoa and Naples. The fact that it sank so far offshore in such profound depth suggests it may have been blown disastrously off course by a sudden Mistral storm. The Mistral is a violent wind that descends from the Alps and can transform the Mediterranean into a treacherous cauldron. The true historical value of Camerat IV lies within its cargo. Because the ship rests at such an extreme depth, it has never been subjected to looting. It exists in a pristine state. For archaeologists, this is the equivalent of discovering an unplundered tomb in Egypt's Valley of the Kings. The cargo hold is likely still packed with the goods it was carrying at the moment of its sinking. Based on other wrecks from the same period, we can speculate on its contents. It could be carrying amphorae of wine or olive oil, bales of raw silk or wool, ingots of metal, or crates of fine ceramics. It might even contain the personal possessions of the crew, their tools, their weapons, their coins, and the simple clay pipes they smoked. These everyday objects are often lost in shallower water wrecks, scattered by wave action or removed by divers. Here they will remain exactly where they fell 5 centuries ago. The extreme depth, however, presents an immense logistical challenge. At 8,400 feet, human divers are an impossibility. Any excavation must be conducted entirely by robotic systems. This necessitates technology typically reserved for deep-sea oil exploration or mining operations. The French Department of Underwater Archaeological Research is currently planning a detailed mission to survey the site using remotely operated vehicles equipped for delicate manipulation. The goal is not to raise the entire ship, as the waterlogged wood is too fragile and the cost would be astronomical, but to create a high-resolution map and to carefully sample the cargo. By retrieving specific artifacts, archaeologists can identify the ship's port of origin, its intended destination, and the precise date of its sinking. A single coin or a potter's mark on a ceramic fragment could pin the wreck to a specific year. Camerat IV offers a unique opportunity to study the middle class of maritime history. We possess abundant information about the great warships and royal galleons of the 16th century. We know far less about the anonymous merchant vessels that sustained the everyday economy. This ship was likely a private enterprise owned by a merchant family or a consortium of investors. Its loss would have represented a financial catastrophe for someone in Marseille or Genoa. For the present moment, the ship remains where it came to rest 500 years ago, a ghost vessel in the perpetual dark. However, Thanks to the advanced sensors of the French Navy, it is no longer lost to history. It is a new coordinate on the map of human heritage, a sealed archive from the Renaissance era that is now poised to be opened. For many decades, we have understood that Homo sapiens did not appear in isolation. Our history is intertwined with a complex familial network of other human species, from the Neanderthals of Europe to the Denisovans of Asia. However, until the year 2025, many of these evolutionary cousins remained abstract labels on a chart or spectral traces within our genetic code. This year, two major discoveries, one in the frozen northern region of China and another within the sun-baked caves of Spain, finally gave distinct faces to these shadowy figures, transforming them from scientific hypotheses into tangible realities. The first discovery centers on a fossil that has undertaken a remarkable journey across the 20th century. In 1933, a Chinese laborer working on a bridge construction in Harbin discovered a massive fossilized human skull within the mud of the Songhua River. He recognized it as an object of great significance, but he also knew that the occupying Japanese military forces would confiscate it if they became aware of its existence. Therefore, he carefully wrapped the skull in cloth and concealed it at the very bottom of a family well. It remained there, submerged and secret, for almost 90 years. On his deathbed, he informed his relatives about the treasure hidden in the well. They recovered it and ultimately donated the specimen to the scientific community. Since its recovery, the Harbin cranium has been the subject of intensive study. It is enormous, larger than any modern human skull, featuring prominent brow ridges, a broad face, and square eye sockets. It housed a brain comparable in size to our own, yet its overall architecture was distinctly archaic, constructed for a world of extreme physical demands. In 2025, a comprehensive new analysis confirmed this is not merely a robust Homo sapiens or an Eastern variant of Neanderthal. It represents a distinct species which researchers have formally named Homo longi, or Dragon Man. The true revelation came from advanced dating and protein analysis. Dragon Man lived at least 146,000 years ago during a profound glacial period. This places a massive, large-brained human species within one of Earth's most punishing environments at a time when our own direct ancestors were still largely confined to the African continent. The physical stature of Dragon Man is terrifyingly formidable. Based on the dimensions of the skull, scientists estimate these individuals were exceptionally robust, biologically adapted for intense cold and tremendous physical exertion. They did not merely survive the Siberian winters, they thrived within them. They hunted mammoths and woolly rhinoceroses, likely lived in small, tightly bonded social groups, and possessed a culture and technology that enabled them to endure conditions that would challenge even modern survival experts. The study also unveiled a genetic revelation of profound importance. Dragon Man is likely the physical manifestation of a species we have known for years only as the Denisovans. Until this point, the Denisovans were defined almost exclusively through genetics, known only from a single finger bone, a few teeth, and fragmented DNA extracted from a Siberian cave. We knew they interbred with our ancestors. We knew they contributed genetic adaptations, such as the gene allowing Tibetans to thrive at high altitudes. However, we possessed no visual concept of their actual appearance. If Dragon Man is indeed a Denisovan, the physical fossil record has finally converged with the genetic evidence. We can now gaze upon the face of the species that dominated Eastern Asia for hundreds of thousands of years. It is a face that is undeniably human yet distinctly different, a parallel evolutionary path that mirrors our own in cognitive capacity but diverged in physical form. While Dragon Man clarifies the portrait of our more recent evolutionary cousins, A separate discovery in Spain pushes the established timeline of human settlement in Europe further back than previously deemed possible. At the Cima del Elefante site within the Atapuerca Mountains, archaeologists unearthed a fragment of a human face, a maxilla or upper jawbone and cheekbone dating back between 1.2 and 1.4 million years. This constitutes the oldest human facial fossil ever discovered in Europe. For a long period, scientific consensus held that humans did not reach Western Europe until a much later date. The continent was colder, populated by formidable predators like saber-toothed cats and giant hyenas, and was thought to be a fortress that only later, more technologically advanced humans could successfully breach. This fossil proves that a pioneering species, likely Homo antecessor, had journeyed all the way to the Atlantic coastline more than 1 million years ago. The fossil fragment is small, yet its morphology is profoundly significant. It reveals a facial structure that is surprisingly modern. Unlike the heavy, protruding faces of apes or even some later human ancestors, this individual possessed a flatter, more vertically oriented profile. This suggests that some of the facial characteristics we consider unique to Homo sapiens actually emerged very early in our evolutionary history, appearing in these ancient pioneers long before our own species ever existed. Considering these two discoveries together, the Harbin skull and the Cima del Elefante jaw creates a far richer and more tangible portrait of the deep human past. It reinforces the fundamental fact that the prehistoric world was a rich tapestry of diverse human forms. 100,000 years ago, a theoretical traveler walking from Africa to Asia would have encountered a varied cast of human characters. In Africa, they would have seen our own ancestors. In Europe, the stocky, adapted Neanderthals. In Asia, the massive, cold, adapted dragon men. On the islands of Indonesia, the diminutive Homo floresiensis. These were not mere biological curiosities. They were people. They manufactured tools. They harnessed and controlled fire. They likely possessed languages and names for one another. They gazed at the same constellations and felt the same winter chill. And as our DNA irrevocably tells us, we did not simply avoid them. We encountered them. We likely fought with them. We traded with them, and we interbred with them. The profound tragedy is that they are all now extinct. We are the sole surviving lineage. We do not know the precise reasons for their disappearance. Did we outcompete them through superior technology or social organization? Did we introduce novel diseases against which they had no defense? Or did shifting climatic conditions simply push their specialized adaptations beyond a viable threshold? Now, we remain the only voice, utilizing our scientific methods to painstakingly reconstruct the stories of the countless cousins who, ultimately, did not make it. While deep-sea divers explored the Mediterranean depths and archaeologists charted the jungles of Guatemala, another research team made a significant discovery in one of the most unforgiving places on the planet, the Judean Desert. This is a landscape of stark and severe beauty. It is a region of profound canyons, eroding limestone cliffs, and relentless sunlight. For thousands of years, it has served as a refuge for rebels, hermits, and outlaws. It is where the biblical David hid from King Saul, where the Zealots made their final stand at Masada, and where the Dead Sea Scrolls were concealed, stored in caves for protection from Roman legions. Due to this rich history, archaeologists have meticulously combed the desert for many decades, searching for additional scrolls before illicit looters can find them. The prevailing assumption has always been that the desert's secrets lie hidden within the earth, inside the countless caves and fissures that permeate the cliffs. However, in March of the year 2025, a team led by the Israel Antiquities Authority discovered something they were not actively seeking. They found a secret constructed upon the earth, high on the cliffs, In an area virtually impossible to access without specialized climbing equipment, they discovered a structure that defies simple explanation. It was not a natural cavern or a simple hermit's shelter. It was a deliberately constructed monument, a small, step-sided pyramid built directly into the rock face. The pyramid stands approximately 10 feet tall and is built from local limestone blocks, carefully cut and fitted together. It is not a tomb in the traditional Egyptian sense, nor is it a colossal monument like those at Giza. It appears to be a nefesh, a type of memorial marker traditionally placed over a grave or used to commemorate a significant event in Second Temple period architecture. Similar structures are known from the Kidron Valley in Jerusalem, such as the Tomb of Zechariah. However, finding one here in the middle of a sheer cliff face and miles from the nearest ancient settlement or road was utterly baffling. It implied a level of effort and expenditure of resources that seemed completely incongruous with such a remote and inaccessible location. Who would transport cut stone blocks up a treacherous cliff to build a monument that, seemingly, no one would ever see? When the team excavated the base of the structure, the mystery intensified. They did not discover a body. Instead, they uncovered a hidden cache. Concealed within the stonework, placed in a deliberately constructed hollow behind the facade, was a collection of artifacts dating to the Hellenistic period, approximately the 3rd century before the Common Era. This was a time of immense geopolitical tension. Following the death of Alexander the Great, his empire had fragmented. The Ptolemies in Egypt and the Seleucids in Syria fought a series of brutal conflicts, the Syrian Wars, for control of the Levant. Judea was the buffer zone, a territory constantly marched over by rival armies. The cache included a hoard of silver tetradrachms. These were coins minted in Alexandrian Tyre, representing high-value currency sufficient to pay a significant number of soldiers for many months. The coins were in pristine, unused condition, suggesting they had been minted, transported, and hidden without ever entering the local economy. Alongside the silver, they discovered weapons, iron spearheads, arrowheads, and the remarkably preserved remains of a composite bow, saved by the extreme aridity of the desert climate. These were not ceremonial objects. They were well-used and lethal instruments of war. Yet the most historically valuable discovery was, as is often the case in this region, written material. Secured inside a sealed ceramic jar, the team found a bundle of papyrus documents. Unlike the Dead Sea Scrolls, which are primarily religious texts such as biblical books, commentaries, and sectarian rules, these documents appear to be administrative and military records. They are written in both Greek and Aramaic, the languages of the imperial administration and the local populace, respectively. Initial translations indicate these are the records of a military garrison, perhaps a secret outpost or a rebel stronghold. The documents detail supply lines, troop movements, and payments made to mercenaries. They mention the names of commanders and military units that do not appear in any other known historical record. They speak of the Fortress of the Cliff and the Watchers of the Salt Sea. This discovery compels us to fundamentally rethink the history of the Judean desert. We often view it as an empty wasteland, a negative space on the map where people only went to hide or to pray. However, the pyramid and the cache suggest it was an active, militarized frontier. The structure may have functioned as a watchtower or a signaling post, part of a lost network of fortifications designed to control the vital trade routes passing through the Dead Sea Valley. The pyramid shape might not have been a tomb at all, but a distinct architectural marker used by a specific military unit or elite guard to demarcate their territory, a symbol of authority visible only to those who knew where to look. The presence of Hellenistic period weaponry is particularly revealing. This was an era when the local Jewish population was caught between the great powers. The cache might represent the supplies of a Jewish unit fighting as mercenaries for the Ptolemies, or perhaps a local resistance group stockpiling weapons for a revolt that history has since forgotten. The composite bow is an exceptionally rare find. These complex weapons, crafted from wood, horn, and sinew, usually disintegrate over time. Its preservation here allows archaeologists to study the military technology of the Hellenistic East in unprecedented detail. Why was this cache abandoned? The coins were never spent, the weapons were never retrieved, and the documents were never archived in a central city. This strongly implies a sudden, violent conclusion to the garrison's occupation. Perhaps the outpost was overrun by a Seleucid army pushing south. Perhaps the inhabitants fled deeper into the desert to escape a purge, hiding their treasury and records in the desperate hope of returning one day. They never did. The silence of the cache speaks to a final disaster that eradicated the only people who knew of its existence. The artifacts are now undergoing conservation in Jerusalem, where the papyri will be subjected to multispectral imaging. This advanced technology can reveal text that is completely invisible to the naked eye, potentially recovering names, dates, and military orders lost for 2,300 years. As we decipher these fragile texts, we may finally learn the name of the commander who stood watch over this desolate canyon. In the spring of the year 1900, a crew of sponge divers from the island of Simi were driven off their intended course by a severe storm. They sought shelter off the rocky coastline of Antikythera, a small and desolate island situated between Crete and the Peloponnese. While waiting for the winds to subside, a diver named Eliastadiatis decided to explore the seabed. He descended approximately 150 feet into the deep blue water. Moments later, he surfaced in a state of panic, incoherently describing a heap of decaying human corpses on the ocean floor. He insisted he had seen men, horses, and women, their limbs contorted and their flesh rotting in the gloom. The diving captain, suspecting the effects of nitrogen narcosis, dove down to investigate. He did not find corpses. He discovered statues. The supposed rotting flesh was actually bronze and marble, corroded by 2,000 years of immersion in salt water. The divers had accidentally encountered the most opulent shipwreck ever recovered from the ancient world. It was a Roman-era cargo vessel laden with a shipment of Greek art so immense that its value remains incalculable to this day. For more than a century, the Antikythera wreck has stood as the most renowned underwater archaeological site on Earth. It is most famous for yielding the Antikythera mechanism, a shoebox-sized lump of bronze gears that was later identified as the world's earliest known analog computer. However, in the year 2025, the shipwreck demonstrated it still possesses profound secrets to unveil. A research team from the Swiss School of Archaeology in Greece, directed by Professor Lorenz Boehmer, returned to the site for a new season of excavation. The wreck rests on a steep underwater slope, rendering excavation exceptionally hazardous. Boulders weighing multiple tons frequently tumble down onto the artifacts, either crushing them or concealing them from view. Utilizing advanced underwater drones and divers equipped with rebreather systems to extend their working time at depth, the 2025 mission successfully moved several of these massive rocks. Beneath them, they uncovered cargo that had been trapped since the vessel sank around 60 years before the Common Era. The most visually striking discovery of the new season was a series of marble fragments belonging to a colossal statue. In 2022, the team had recovered a massive marble head depicting Hercules. This year, they found the remainder of him buried deep within the sand, protected from the erosive effects of seawater. They uncovered the statue's plinth and lower legs. The state of preservation was extraordinary. While marble exposed directly to the open ocean is typically consumed by date mussels and marine sponges until it resembles porous cheese, marble buried in sediment retains its original smooth, polished surface. This discovery enables archaeologists to fully comprehend the monumental scale of the lost artwork. The Hercules statue was twice life-size. It was a masterpiece of the Hellenistic Baroque style, likely looted from a temple in Greece or Asia Minor to decorate the villa of an affluent Roman senator. Finding the base in its original position confirms these statues were not merely loose cargo rolling freely. They were carefully packed and secured for the ocean voyage, only to be shattered when the ship struck the rocks. Yet the 2025 seasons yielded more than just fine art. It revealed critical details about the ship itself. For the very first time, divers recovered a substantial section of the hull that remained articulated, meaning the wooden planks were still fastened to the internal frame. This represents a holy grail for maritime archaeologists. Typically, waterlogged wood rots away completely or is found only as scattered fragments. This specific section, preserved under a protective layer of clay and pottery sherds, confirms the Antikythera vessel was a titan of its time. The hull was constructed using the shell-first method, a technique where the outer planks are joined together with thousands of precise mortise and tenon joints before the internal skeleton is added. This is a method demanding immense skill and labor, resulting in a hull that is exceptionally strong yet flexible. The dimensions of the recovered planks suggest the ship was over 130 feet long, a veritable super freighter of its era, capable of transporting hundreds of tons of cargo. The tragedy of the Antikythera wreck lies in the monumental scale of the cultural loss. This was not merely a merchant ship transporting wine and grain. It was a floating museum. The cargo consisted of dozens of bronze and marble statues, luxury glassware, ornate furniture, and jewelry. It was likely part of a convoy carrying the spoils of war, or the fruits of taxation from the newly conquered Greek East, destined for the voracious markets of Rome. When it sank, it took with it some of the most sophisticated technology and refined art the world had ever produced. This brings us back to the wreck's most famous object, the Antikythera mechanism. For decades following its discovery in 1901, the mechanism was largely disregarded. It resembled a corroded green lump of rock. It sat in a museum storage drawer until the 1950s when a historian named Derek J. DeSala Price began to examine it with X-ray technology. He discovered gears, not simple wheels, but complex epicyclic gear trains that would not be reinvented in Europe until the 14th century of the Common Era. The mechanism was a hand-powered orrery. By turning a crank on its side, a user could track the movements of the sun, the moon, and the 5 known planets. It could predict eclipses decades in advance, track the 4-year cycle of the Olympic Games, and even calculate the irregular orbit of the moon. It was a machine of impossible precision. The discovery of the Hercules statue and the hull fragments in 2025 recontextualizes the mechanism. It suggests this device was not a unique prototype or a solitary genius's toy. It was likely just one item within a shipment of high-end luxury goods. This implies there was an established market for such complex devices in Rome. Just as a wealthy Roman might purchase a Greek statue for his garden, he might acquire a Greek mechanical computer for his library to impress his associates. This fundamentally changes our perspective on ancient technology. If the mechanism was a trade commodity, it means there were others manufactured. It implies there were workshops in cities like Rhodes or Syracuse producing precision gears and dials. The fact we have found only one is a statistical anomaly, a direct result of bronze's intrinsic value. It was almost always melted down and recycled in later centuries. The sole reason the Antikythera mechanism survived is because it was hidden at the bottom of the sea, safe from the smelter's furnace. The 2025 excavations also recovered human remains, 2 teeth found embedded within the marine concretion. This offers the potential for DNA analysis to identify the crew members. Were they Greeks, Romans, or enslaved individuals from the eastern provinces? Knowing who was on board adds a vital human dimension to the tragedy. This was a catastrophic maritime disaster. A massive ship overloaded with heavy stone and bronze, caught in a sudden storm off a notorious cape where the Aegean Sea meets the Ionian Sea. It would have been smashed against the cliffs, spilling its priceless cargo into the abyss. The cultural wealth lost in that single instant is staggering. The bronze statues alone would have constituted a fortune. In the ancient world, bronze was the primary medium for high-status art. Today, fewer than 50 large-scale Greek bronze statues exist worldwide. The Antikythera wreck has yielded several, and the research team believes more remain on the seabed, buried beneath the boulders. As the team prepares for future excavation seasons, the focus will remain on the area where the Hercules' head was discovered. The hope is that the rest of his body is waiting there, perhaps alongside other artistic masterpieces that have not seen sunlight since the days of Julius Caesar. Thanks to the persistent dedication of archaeologists and the advanced technology of the 21st century, we are finally bringing these lost treasures back to the surface. For the majority of our modern historical understanding, we have perceived the Aegean Sea as a natural impediment. Observing a contemporary map, we see a fragmented terrain of hundreds of islands separating the landmass of Anatolia from the European continent. The assumption has been that for early human populations, this expanse of water constituted an obstacle that could only be traversed with some form of watercraft. This assumption created a significant void in our comprehension of human migration patterns. We knew humans originated in Africa and eventually reached Europe, but the specific route they followed has remained a subject of intense debate. Did they travel north around the Black Sea? Did they develop seafaring abilities far earlier than the evidence suggests? In October of the year 2025, a team of researchers from Hacettepe University and Ankara University published findings that fundamentally altered this geographical and historical picture. Directed by Dr. Juner K. Ren, the team conducted an extensive survey along the coastline of the Ivrindi district in northwestern Turkey. They were not searching for shipwrecks. They were seeking evidence that the sea had not always been present. What they discovered has rewritten the narrative of how humanity first entered the European continent. Scattered across 10 different locations along the coast, the team recovered a collection of 138 stone tools. These were not simple pebbles. They were sophisticated hand axes, cleavers, and chopping implements. The design of these tools was unmistakable. They displayed the definitive characteristics of the Levallois technique. This is a specific method of stone knapping where a core is meticulously prepared in order to strike off a perfectly shaped flake. It is a technology associated with the Middle Paleolithic period, roughly spanning from 300,000 to 50,000 years ago. This places the artifacts firmly within the era of the Neanderthals and the very earliest dispersals of Homo sapiens. The presence of these tools in this precise geographical location confirms a geological theory that has been debated for many decades. During the Pleistocene epoch, the world was in the grip of the most recent ice age. Enormous volumes of the planet's water were locked within polar ice caps and continental glaciers. Global sea levels were substantially lower than they are in the present day. During certain periods, they were more than 300 feet lower. When you lower the level of the Aegean Sea by 300 feet, the map transforms entirely. The shallow waters lying between modern Turkey and Greece vanish. The islands of Lesbos, Chios, and Samos cease to be islands. They become the peaks of mountains rising from a vast, grassy plain. The discovery at Avrindi proves this was not merely a geological possibility. It was a human reality. The land bridge was accessible, and people were actively utilizing it. This changes the migration narrative from a maritime saga to a pedestrian one. Early humans did not need to invent boats to reach Europe. They simply needed to walk. The Aegean was not a barrier. It was a superhighway. It was a broad, fertile corridor connecting the Near East to the Balkan Peninsula. We can now reconstruct the appearance of this vanished landscape. It was not a desolate, narrow land bridge like the one across the Bering Strait. Paleoenvironmental data indicates it was a rich savanna environment. It was watered by large river systems that flowed out across the exposed continental shelf before finally reaching the greatly receded shoreline. This terrain would have supported immense herds of grazing animals. We know from fossil discoveries on the Greek islands that this region was home to pygmy elephants, giant deer, and hippopotamuses. These animals would have migrated seasonally between Asia and Europe, grazing on the Aegean plain. The predators, including lions and early human groups, would have simply followed the herds. The tools recovered by Dr. K. Run's team suggest long-term human occupation, not a fleeting passage. The density of the finds indicates that people lived here. They established camps, procured raw materials from local riverbeds, and manufactured tools to process the animals they hunted. The Aegean land bridge was a viable habitat in its own right. This discovery resolves a major logistical puzzle in archaeology. For years, we have encountered archaeological sites in Greece that appear too ancient to be explained by boat migration. We have stone tools on Crete and Naxos dating back hundreds of thousands of years. If one assumes the sea has always been in place, these sites are profoundly confusing. They imply a level of maritime technology that does not align with the rest of the archaeological record. However, if one accepts the existence of the land bridge, the mystery dissolves. The individuals who left those tools did not sail to Crete. They walked there. They were living on the coastal plains, and what are now islands were simply the hills overlooking their hunting grounds. The implications for human evolution are considerable. It means that Anatolia and Europe were not separate biological regions for much of the Pleistocene. They were a single, continuous territory. Genetic and cultural exchange between populations in the Near East and Europe would have been constant and fluid, rather than rare and difficult. The findings at Avrindi likely represent merely the periphery of a far larger archaeological province. The tools were discovered in the intertidal zone and along the modern coastline. This is the very fringe of the lost landscape. The core of this Paleolithic territory, the primary camps, the major butchery sites, the preferred rock shelters would have been situated on the valley floors near the ancient rivers. Today, those valleys lie deep beneath the Aegean Sea. We are only finding the artifacts that were left on the higher ground, on the ridges that remained above water when the ice sheets finally melted and sea levels rose. This adds a layer of poignant tragedy to the discovery. We can confirm the existence of this lost world, yet we will likely never be able to excavate its heart. The rise in sea levels at the conclusion of the last ice age was a slow-moving catastrophe for the people living there. As the glaciers receded around 12,000 years ago, the ocean began to reclaim the land. The grassy plains were gradually flooded. The river valleys transformed into bays. The hills became islands. The people who had inhabited this region for millennia were forced to retreat to the higher ground of the emerging mainlands or were permanently isolated on the newly formed islands. The stone tools found this year are the survivors of that great inundation. They are durable evidence of a time when the fundamental geography of our world was profoundly different. This discovery also compels us to reevaluate our archaeological search strategies. Researchers have traditionally focused on caves and river terraces located on the current mainland. However, if the primary migratory route into Europe was the Aegean Plain, then we have been searching along the margins. The central story of human migration unfolded on terrain that no longer exists above the waves. Dr. Kaya Ran and her team plan to expand their survey further inland and into the shallow offshore waters. They are searching for more evidence of the specific tool-making traditions employed by these ancient pioneers. The Aegean land bridge was not merely a shortcut. It was a homeland. It was a landscape that supported human life for countless generations. And so, in 2025, we have finally located the tangible traces of the first Europeans. They were not on the beaches of Greece or in the mountains of Bulgaria. They were on a lost plain that seamlessly connected two continents. This proves that the perceived separation between East and West is a modern accident of geology. In the deep past, there was no sea to divide humanity. There was only the open horizon and the herds moving north. Among all the archaeological locations worldwide, few seize the human imagination quite like the ancient town of Herculaneum. When Mount Vesuvius erupted in the year 79 of the Common Era, it buried this Roman coastal settlement under approximately 60 feet of volcanic mud. While nearby Pompeii was devastated by falling ash and pumice, Herculaneum was sealed within an airtight tomb of superheated pyroclastic material. This distinctive form of preservation safeguarded something that was lost everywhere else across the ancient classical world: an intact library. In the 18th century, excavators digging tunnels beneath the modern town of Ercolano broke into the remains of a massive Roman villa. It was later identified as the Villa of the Papyri, named for the astonishing discovery made inside its walls. They uncovered hundreds of carbonized scrolls. These ancient documents had been baked by the extreme heat of the eruption, transforming them into lumps of charcoal that resembled burnt logs. For centuries thereafter, scholars attempted to physically open them. They employed knives, mercury, and specialized mechanical unrolling machines invented by a monk in the 1700s. Yet nearly every attempt concluded in failure. The carbonized layers were so fragile they disintegrated into dust the moment they were disturbed. We knew we possessed the sole surviving library from classical antiquity, but we could not read a single word within it without causing its total destruction. Consequently, the scrolls were stored away in museum collections, a trove of unreadable black lumps containing the lost wisdom of the ancient world. The ultimate solution did not originate from a trowel or an artist's brush. It emerged from the fields of particle physics and artificial intelligence. The pivotal breakthrough began with Dr. Brent Seals, a computer scientist at the University of Kentucky. He theorized that if the scrolls could not be physically unrolled, they must be unrolled digitally. His team utilized a particle accelerator known as a synchrotron to scan the scrolls with high-energy X-rays. This process generated a detailed three-dimensional model of the interior of the charcoal lumps. One could observe the layers of papyrus wrapped around each other, resembling a tightly coiled jelly roll. However, a significant problem remained. The ink used by Roman scribes was carbon-based, and the papyrus itself was also composed of carbon. On a standard X-ray scan, the ink was entirely invisible. It was black ink written on blackened paper. To overcome this seemingly insurmountable obstacle, Seals launched the Vesuvius Challenge in 2023. This was a global, open competition that released the high-resolution scan data to the public and offered a substantial monetary prize to any individual or team who could train an artificial intelligence system to detect the invisible ink. The concept was that the ink, even if chemically similar to the paper substrate, would leave an extremely subtle textural difference or a minute variation in density, a faint crackle pattern that a sophisticated machine learning algorithm might be trained to recognize. The first major success astonished the global community. In late 2023, a student named Luke Farrader successfully trained an AI model to detect the ink, revealing a single, clear word from deep within a completely sealed scroll of porphyras, ancient Greek for purple. It was the first time in 2,000 years that a human being had read a word from inside an unopened Herculaneum scroll. It proved the underlying concept was viable. By early 2024, the grand prize of the challenge was claimed. A collaborative team of 3 students, Youssef Nader, Luke Farrader, and Julian Schilliger, combined their programming code to read not merely a word, but entire columns of continuous text. Now in 2025, we are witnessing the full, transformative impact of that historic victory. The technology has progressed from a proof of concept to a functional, scalable production line. Dr. Seals and the Vesuvius Challenge team are currently scaling up the virtual unwrapping process, scanning more scrolls from the collection, and refining the artificial intelligence to read them more rapidly and efficiently. What was once a cautious trickle of isolated letters has become a veritable flood of recovered philosophy. The text decoded by the grand prize-winning team has now been fully translated and subjected to scholarly analysis. It is a previously unknown philosophical work by Philodemus of Gadara, an Epicurean philosopher who lived in the 1st century, before the Common Era, and was likely the resident scholar of the Villa of the Papyri. The content is profoundly significant because it provides a direct, unfiltered window into the intellectual life of the Roman elite. In this recovered text, Philodemus discusses the nature of pleasure, music, and culinary enjoyment. He argues against his philosophical rivals, the Stoics, debating whether elements like music and luxury foods are intrinsically good, or only perceived as good due to their scarcity. He writes about human senses and how they interact with the mind. One translated passage reads, "As in the case of food, we do not immediately believe that things that are scarce are absolutely more pleasant than those that are abundant. This is a critique of excessive luxury and a defense of finding genuine happiness in simpler things, which constitutes the very core of Epicurean philosophy. However, the philosophical content is almost secondary to the monumental implication of the discovery itself. The text mentions a historical figure named Xenopapas, a flute player referenced by ancient historians like Plutarch. It cites other thinkers and intellectual disputes of which we had lost all trace. We are, in effect, listening to an ancient scholarly conversation that was abruptly cut off mid-sentence by a volcanic cataclysm. The implications for 2025 and the years that follow are immense. The Villa of the Papyri has not been fully excavated. The majority of the site remains buried under 60 feet of solidified volcanic rock. Archaeologists theorize that the scrolls discovered thus far represent merely a working library or a small collection that was being packed for transport when the eruption began. The villa's main library, which would likely contain Latin texts alongside Greek works, might still be entombed within the unexcavated portions, sitting on its original shelves. If we can locate it, we now possess the proven, non-destructive technology to read it. Consider what this fundamentally means. We have lost almost the entirety of classical literature. We possess only 7 of Sophocles' estimated 120 plays. We have lost entire volumes of Roman history written by Livy and Tacitus. We have lost the scientific works of the pre-Socratic philosophers and the poetry of Sappho. Until the recent success of the Vesuvius Challenge, we assumed those works were gone forever. Herculaneum now offers a tangible potential for their recovery. The very carbonization process that rendered the scrolls impossible to open physically also made them immune to biological decay. They are chemically stable. They have been waiting. The stated goal for 2025 is to successfully raid 90% of the 4 scrolls currently scanned and residing in the project's digital database. This would effectively resurrect complete, lost books from the dead. Looking beyond Herculaneum, Dr. Seals's methodology represents an entirely new frontier in virtual archaeology. This technology could be applied to other, impossible texts. Medieval manuscripts recycled into book bindings, brittle scrolls from the Judean desert, or ancient Egyptian cartonnage papyrus used to wrap mummies, which often contains recycled documentary and literary fragments. The Scroll of Philodemus is merely the first recovered page of a vast, new chapter in our understanding of history. For 2,000 years, the eruption of Vesuvius was viewed exclusively as a tragedy that obliterated a vibrant civilization. Yet, in a profound and unexpected twist of fate, it was the volcano itself that preserved these precious books for us. It locked them within a perfect time capsule that we, in our own technological era, have finally learned how to open. Turning from the mystery of the enigmatic figures, we journey to the work of another archaeological team in Mexico, a team that has been fundamentally rewriting the historical narrative of the Pacific coastline. For many decades, the archaeology of Mesoamerica has been dominated by the legacies of 2 great civilizations, the Maya in the eastern regions and the Aztecs in the central highlands. The vast geographical areas situated between these powers, particularly along the rugged coastal zone of Guerrero, were often dismissed as cultural peripheries, simple villages existing on the margins of what were considered the true, complex societies. However, in October of the year 2025, that long-held assumption was completely dismantled. A research team from Mexico's National Institute of Anthropology and History, directed by archaeologist Miguel Pérez Negrete, announced the discovery of an immense, previously unknown urban center within the Costa Chica region of Guerrero. They have named this site Paso Temprano, although local inhabitants have long referred to the overgrown earthen mounds in the area as Corral de Piedra. The scale of the site is enormous. It occupies more than 1 kilometer of ridgelines and hills, establishing it as one of the largest pre-Hispanic cities ever discovered in western Mexico. It dates to the Epiclassic period, approximately 650 to 950 years after the Common Era began. This was an epoch of significant political upheaval following the collapse of the great metropolis of Teotihuacan. Yet what renders Paso Temprano truly revolutionary is not merely its size, but its unique architectural form. Unlike the characteristic square pyramids and rectangular plazas of the Maya or Aztec worlds, the builders of Paso Temprano were profoundly focused on the circle. The city is anchored by massive circular platforms, some measuring over 150 feet in diameter. These round structures are constructed from river cobbles and compacted earth, rising in successive, tiered layers that would have supported temples or elite residential compounds. This distinct circular style firmly connects the site to the Yesla, Naranjo cultural tradition, a society that has remained largely enigmatic to archaeologists. Until this discovery, evidence for this culture consisted only of scattered artifact ceramics with a distinctive orange slip and stylized serpent iconography. Paso Temprano proves conclusively they were not a loose confederation of tribes, but a sophisticated, centralized state capable of organizing monumental construction projects. The masonry technique observed at the site displays a method researchers have termed aparamedico, characterized by upright stone blocks alternating with thin horizontal slabs. This specific style links Paso Temprano architecturally to other known ancient sites, such as Tehuacalco, suggesting a shared architectural language that spanned a broad region. The precision evident in the stonework implies a highly skilled class of masons and a society that valued permanence, strength, and aesthetic order. Excavations have revealed a complex urban layout that reflects a clearly defined social hierarchy. The city climbs steep, defensible ridge lines. The lower slopes contain isolated architectural units and residential zones which the research team has designated Pueblo Viejo. These areas preserve traces of domestic rooms, entry vestibules, and connecting corridors, offering a direct glimpse into the daily lives of the common populace. Higher on the slopes, the elite sectors of the city feature palace-like compounds and ceremonial spaces, physically elevated above the rest of the population in a clear statement of social stratification. Among the most significant discoveries is a massive eye-shaped ball court, measuring 161 feet in length. Ball courts were central institutions in Mesoamerican life, serving as venues for a ritual game that symbolized the cosmic struggle between celestial bodies, namely the sun and the moon. The presence of such a large and formal court at Paso Temprano indicates its residents actively participated in these profound ceremonial traditions, linking them ideologically to the broader religious currents of the continent. Adjacent to the court, archaeologists discovered a smooth stone stela that likely functioned as a ritual altar, further reinforcing the site's primary role as a regional spiritual and ceremonial center. The geographical location of the city is equally significant. It sits at a strategic choke point between the interior highlands and the Pacific coastline. This positioning strongly suggests Paso Temprano functioned as a gatekeeper city, controlling vital trade routes that moved commodities like obsidian, copper, and marine shells between the powerful empires of the interior and the extensive coastal exchange networks to the west. Artifacts recovered at the site corroborate this proposed economic role. Archaeologists have found materials indicative of long-distance connections. The Costa Chica region historically served as a vital corridor for the movement of valuable goods such as cacao, cotton, and salt. The establishment of a powerful, centralized city like Paso Temprano suggests an independent state emerged to control and profit from this flow of commerce, extracting wealth from the trade that passed through its territory. This discovery fills a massive void on the archaeological map of ancient Mexico. It demonstrates that during the era when Teotihuacan was collapsing in the center and Maya city-states were warring in the eastern jungles, a third, entirely distinct civilization was flourishing on the Pacific coast, constructing a majestic city of circles that has been lost to history for approximately 1,200 years. The ultimate decline of Paso Temprano remains an unresolved mystery. Around the year 1100 of the Common Era, the city was abandoned. There are no obvious archaeological signs of violent destruction, conquest, or invasion. The population appears to have gradually dispersed, leaving their great stone circles to be slowly reclaimed by the encroaching forest. Potential explanations include a shift in the balance of power due to the rise of the Mixtec kingdoms to the east, or perhaps environmental changes that rendered the hilltop settlement unsustainable. Although the region was later occupied by Amozgo and Mixtec peoples, the original founders and builders of Paso Temprano remain a historical puzzle. While excavation is still in its initial phases, Paso Temprano is already compelling a fundamental rewrite of Mexican history. It serves as a powerful reminder that the geographical periphery was often a center of innovation and power in its own right. The map of ancient Mexico is not a simple story of only Aztecs and Maya. It is a rich, intricate mosaic of diverse, independent cultures that we are only now beginning to comprehend. As the research team continues to clear vegetation from the ancient stone circles, they are gradually revealing the contours of a civilization that marched to its own distinct rhythm, building an architectural and cultural legacy that definitely broke away from the square-dominated logic of its better-known neighbors. Departing from the city of seven ravines, we journey to the arid canyons of Jordan. For more than 200 years, the ancient city of Petra has ranked among the most visited archaeological locations on Earth. Its defining monument is Al-Kazna, also known as the Treasury, an enormous facade carved directly into a towering cliff of pink sandstone. This structure has evolved into a global icon, famously depicted as the resting place of the Holy Grail in the film Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. For decades, countless tourists have walked across the sandy floor in front of the treasury, assuming the entire site had been fully documented and understood. In late 2024, leading directly into the 2025 field season, a joint archaeological mission involving the Jordanian Department of Antiquities and the American Center of Research returned to the site. Led by Executive Director Dr. Perce Paul Kriesman, the team was equipped with ground-penetrating radar. They were investigating a theory that additional, unknown chambers might exist beneath the monumental plaza. The radar scans detected strong anomalies suggesting empty spaces that did not correspond with the natural geology of the bedrock. Rare permission was granted to conduct a limited excavation at this highly protected UNESCO World Heritage Site. As the team, joined by Josh Gates and the crew of the television series Expedition Unknown, began digging carefully beneath the iconic facade, they uncovered the entrance to a previously unknown subterranean tomb. Unlike the majority of tombs in Petra, which were emptied by grave robbers centuries ago or reused by later inhabitants, this chamber was found in a pristine, undisturbed state. Inside, the archaeologists discovered the complete skeletal remains of 12 individuals. To comprehend the magnitude of this discovery, it is essential to understand the people who constructed it. The Nabateans were originally a nomadic Arab people who emerged from the Arabian desert to master control of the immensely lucrative incense trade routes of the ancient world. They became the supremely wealthy middlemen of antiquity, transporting frankincense and myrrh from the southern Arabian Peninsula to the temples and palaces of Rome and Greece. It was this colossal wealth that enabled them to carve an entire metropolis from solid rock in the heart of the desert. Yet, despite their profound architectural legacy, they left behind very few written records, rendering them one of history's most enigmatic civilizations. Their success was not solely economic, it was also a triumph of engineering. The Nabateans were masters of hydrology in a landscape that receives only a few inches of rainfall each year. They carved intricate channels into the rock faces to capture flash floods, directing the water into vast underground cisterns lined with waterproof cement. This ingenious system allowed Petra to support a permanent population of 30,000 people and to function as a vital oasis for caravans crossing the harsh desert. Without this mastery of water management, the city and the treasury itself would have been impossible. The treasury has always presented an architectural puzzle. Its design represents a unique fusion of Hellenistic Greek style and indigenous Arabian tradition. The facade features Corinthian columns and figures from Greek mythology such as Castor and Pollux, yet it also incorporates local symbols like eagles. For centuries, scholars have debated its primary function. Was it a temple dedicated to the goddess Isis, a treasury house for collecting taxes, or a royal tomb? The name Al-Khazni originates from a local Bedouin legend that an Egyptian pharaoh concealed his gold inside the stone urn that crowns the top of the facade. For generations, tribesmen fired rifles at this urn, hoping to shatter it and release the fabled gold. The bullet marks remain visible on the stone to this day. However, the recent excavation revealed the true historical treasure was located underground. Among the bronze, iron, and ceramic grave goods recovered, one particular object captured attention. One of the skeletons was discovered clutching a ceramic chalice. The shape of this vessel bore a coincidental yet striking resemblance to the prop Grail cup used in the Indiana Jones film shot at the very same location. While the artifact was identified as the top portion of a broken juglet, rather than a ritually significant object, its presence within the tomb presented a notable curiosity given the site's entrenched pop culture association. The discovery helps clarify the true purpose of the treasury. The presence of 12 skeletons interred directly beneath the main structure provides powerful support for the theory that Al-Khazni was constructed as a royal mausoleum. Based on associated pottery and sediment analysis, the tomb dates to the reign of King Aretas IV, who ruled approximately from 9 years before the Common Era to 40 years after. Aretas I was the greatest of the Nabatean kings, presiding over Petra's golden age. His daughter Phasaelis was married to Herod Antipas, the ruler of Galilee, directly linking the Nabatean royal family to the biblical history of the region. Under Aretas IV, Petra matured into a sophisticated urban center, and it is fitting that the city's most iconic monument would serve as the final resting place for his family. The condition of the skeletons is of significant scientific importance. Finding complete, articulated skeletal remains in Petra is exceptionally rare due to environmental factors. The humidity and the acidic nature of the sandstone bedrock tend to disintegrate bone over time. Furthermore, Nabatean burial practices often involve the secondary collection and reburial of bones, making individual identification extremely challenging. The remarkable preservation of these 12 individuals now allows scientists to conduct comprehensive DNA analysis, potentially revealing their ages, health status, dietary patterns, and genetic relationships to one another. This provides the first concrete biological data concerning the Nabatean royalty who commissioned and oversaw the construction of this magnificent city. This discovery definitively confirms that the treasury was not merely a ceremonial facade, but an active and integral component of the Nabatean royal necropolis. It demonstrates that even at the world's most extensively studied and famous archaeological sites, profound history can still lie hidden, waiting beneath the ground. As Dr. Kriasman noted, there is still much to learn about who exactly these 12 people were and how they relate to the king buried above them. The excavation and analysis are ongoing, and future DNA results may finally bestow names upon the royal builders of Petra, moving from the monumental tombs of royalty to the more somber aspects of the ancient world. We encounter a different dimension of history. Typically, the focus of archaeology concerns how people lived, what they consumed, how they constructed their dwellings, and which deities they venerated. However, on occasion we uncover evidence of something more unsettling. We find evidence of what they feared most profoundly. In the year 2025, 2 separate archaeological discoveries, one in the deserts of Egypt and another in a medieval cemetery in Poland, compelled us to confront the raw, visceral human terror surrounding death itself. The first narrative originates within the storerooms of the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. For nearly a full century, museum curators had been perplexed by a peculiar mummy known simply as the Screaming Woman. Discovered in 1935 within the Deir el-Bahari cache near Luxor, she was interred beneath the tomb of Senenmut, the chief architect for Queen Hatshepsut. Yet, unlike the serene and composed visages of the royal mummies surrounding her, this woman's mouth was contorted into a wide, terrifying grimace of apparent agony. For many decades, the dominant theory held that her expression resulted simply from inadequate mummification practices. It was assumed the embalmer had been negligent, failing to properly secure her jaw, which subsequently fell open during bodily decomposition. She was dismissed as a procedural error. However, this year, a research team led by Dr. Sahar Salim, a professor of radiology at Cairo University, decided to investigate the case more thoroughly. Employing advanced computed tomography scanning technology, they performed a complete virtual dissection of the mummy, examining the interior beneath the linen wrappings without causing any physical damage. The results, published in the journal Frontiers in Medicine, completely overturned the careless embalmer hypothesis. The scans revealed the woman had been mummified with extraordinary attention and care. Her internal organs remained within her body cavity, a rare practice, yet they were preserved in perfect condition. Her skin had been treated with expensive imported substances, juniper resin and frankincense, likely transported from as far away as the Eastern Mediterranean or East Africa. Her hair was dyed with henna and juniper, and she wore a wig crafted from date palm fibers that had been treated with quartz crystals to maintain its stiff, black appearance. This was not a cheap or hasty burial. This was an elite woman treated with the highest level of respect and the most costly materials available during the Egyptian 18th dynasty. So, why was she screaming? Salim's detailed analysis points toward a rare and horrifying physiological phenomenon known as a cadaveric spasm. In instances of extreme violence, intense physical pain, or profound emotional distress occurring at the precise moment of death, the body's muscles can seize up instantaneously, locking the corpse into its final posture. Unlike rigor mortis, which sets in several hours post-mortem and eventually dissipates, a cadaveric spasm is immediate and becomes permanently rigid. The implication is chilling. The screaming woman likely died in a state of sheer terror or agony so intense that her facial muscles froze into a scream. The embalmer, despite their considerable skill and the costly materials at their disposal, was physically unable to close her mouth. The post-mortem rigidity was too powerful. They were compelled to wrap her body exactly as they found it, preserving her final moment of profound suffering for all eternity. We will probably never know the exact manner of her death, whether it resulted from a sudden heart attack, a violent physical assault, or an excruciating illness. However, the CT scan has provided us with the closest equivalent to a witness statement from 3,500 years in the past. While the screaming woman reveals the stark physical reality of a traumatic death, a discovery in Poland illuminates the supernatural fear of what may occur after death. In the village of Pi, archaeologists from Nicolaus Copernicus University have been excavating a 17th-century burial ground that local tradition has labeled the Field of Vampires. This was not an ordinary cemetery. It was a designated place for the socially ostracized individuals who were feared during their lifetimes and whose neighbors remained terrified of them even in death. In late 2024 and early 2025, the research team uncovered a series of burials that demonstrated the profound depth of this communal fear. One skeleton, identified as belonging to a young woman, was discovered with a sickle placed firmly across her neck. The blade was not merely resting there. It was deliberately positioned so that if the corpse attempted to sit up within the grave, the sickle would instantly decapitate it. This constituted a specific, calculated anti-vampire measure. According to the regional folklore, a Strigar vampire was a restless spirit capable of returning to the world of the living to consume blood or spread disease. The sickle functioned as a fail-safe mechanism, a physical barrier ensuring the deceased individual remained permanently deceased. Yet the sickle was not the only precaution taken. On the big toe of her left foot, archaeologists discovered a triangular iron padlock. This object symbolized the definitive closing of a stage of life, metaphorically locking her to the earth so she could not return to haunt the living community. Nearby, the team located another grave, this one containing the remains of a child aged between 5 and 7 years. The child had been buried face down, a deliberate practice intended to confuse the spirit, causing it to dig downward into the earth rather than upward toward the world of the living. At some point following the initial burial, the villagers apparently exhumed the body and removed the child's lower legs, subsequently placing a padlock beneath the heel. These burials date to a period of immense social turmoil within Poland. The 17th century was an era defined by warfare, plague epidemics, and intense religious conflict. When communities exist under severe stress, they frequently seek scapegoats. Individuals who died suddenly, who possessed physical deformities, or who were simply perceived as outsiders became targets for these deep-seated supernatural anxieties. The so-called vampires of Pied were likely ordinary people, perhaps victims of a misunderstood disease like tuberculosis or cholera, who were transformed into monstrous figures within the fearful imaginations of their grieving neighbors. Considered together, these two discoveries offer a profound insight into how ancient and early modern societies grappled with the universal reality of mortality. In ancient Egypt, the cultural objective was preservation. To maintain the body's physical integrity, to apply the finest resins and oils to ensure the soul could endure eternally, even if that process meant preserving forever a final scream of agony. In 17th century Poland, the objective was containment, to utilize iron and steel to imprison the soul within the ground, a desperate act intended to protect the living community from the perceived threat of the restless dead. While the dense rainforests of the Amazon were finally yielding their secrets to laser scanning technology, another monumental discovery was unfolding halfway across the globe. This time, the setting was not a jungle, but the vast open grasslands of the Eurasian steppe. For multiple generations, historians have propagated a specific narrative about this part of the world. The traditional understanding taught that the steppe functioned primarily as a highway for nomadic peoples. The conventional view held that populations here dwelled in portable yurts and temporary encampments, migrating with the seasonal cycles to pasture their herds of cattle and sheep. They were celebrated as masters of horsemanship, but the narrative asserted they did not construct permanent cities. They did not remain in one location long enough to leave behind anything more substantial than burial mounds known as kurgans. However, in November of the year 2025, a new archaeological survey completely shattered that long-held concept. An international research team led by Dr. Milana Radovojevic from University College London and Dr. Victor Mertz from Taraz State University published the first comprehensive analysis of a location known as Semyarka, or the City of Seven Ravines. The story of its initial detection actually begins decades earlier, during the Cold War era. In the 1960s, American spy satellites operating under the Corona program were capturing high-resolution photographs of the Earth's surface to monitor global military activities. When those images were eventually declassified years later, archaeologists examining the pictures of northeastern Kazakhstan noticed something unusual. On an elevated parcel of land overlooking the Irtysh River, there appeared faint geometric shadows visible within the grassland. These features looked too straight and too systematically organized to be natural formations. Yet for a long period, no institution possessed the funding or logistical capacity to travel to this remote area and conduct a proper investigation to determine what those shadows truly represented. That situation changed decisively this year. Utilizing advanced drone photography and magnetometry, a technology that functions essentially as an X-ray for the subsurface, the research team finally revealed the extraordinary truth. Semilka was not merely a seasonal campsite. It was a sprawling Bronze Age metropolis covering nearly 350 acres. To provide a sense of scale, this settlement is approximately 3 times larger than any other known site from the same historical period discovered anywhere in the region. It dates back to around 1600 years before the Common Era. This places it contemporaneous with the famous palace complexes of Mycenaean Greece and the zenith of the Shang dynasty in China. Yet, unlike those celebrated civilizations, which constructed enduring edifices from stone and brick, the people of Semilka built with the earth itself. This fundamental choice of material is precisely why their great city remained concealed in plain sight for millennia. It had, quite literally, melted back into the surrounding landscape. The results from the geophysical scans were startling. They demonstrated this city was not a chaotic, organic accumulation of tents that developed haphazardly over time. It was meticulously planned. The team mapped 2 massive rows of rectangular earthen mounds extending across the terrain. These were the foundational remains of permanent, multi-room dwellings. They were arranged in a strict, orderly grid pattern, which conveys a crucial sociological insight. This level of urban planning indicates a central coordinating authority. You do not achieve such a precise geometric layout by accident. You achieve it when a governing power designs the entire city before the construction of a single dwelling commences. The layout is so remarkably uniform that researchers theorize the entire urban complex might have been erected in a single, massive burst of coordinated construction activity. Consider the immense social coordination this would require. Thousands of individuals, whom history has largely characterized as nomadic wanderers of the open plains, converging to build a permanent capital city essentially from scratch. At the very center of the settlement lies an exceptionally large building. It is oriented almost perfectly along an east-west axis and is twice the size of the surrounding residential structures. Archaeologists hypothesize this might have functioned as a community meeting hall, a temple, or perhaps the palace of a ruling elite family. The mere existence of this prominent central edifice tells us this society possessed a clear social hierarchy. There were leaders and followers, individuals of greater and lesser wealth, a social stratification scholars did not previously attribute to the supposedly simple pastoral herders of the steppe. However, the true transformative discovery was made on the southeastern periphery of the city. Here, the soil composition was markedly different, littered with industrial debris, slag, broken crucibles, and waste rock. This was a dedicated industrial manufacturing zone. Laboratory analysis of the recovered artifacts confirmed the people of Semilka were not merely crafting small decorative items. They were operating a massive production facility for the manufacture of tin bronze. This detail is critically important due to the materials involved. To produce bronze, one requires both copper and tin. Copper was relatively accessible, with ores like malachite and azurite found at the site, likely mined from local deposits. Tin, however, is geographically rare. The nearest significant sources of tin ore are located in the Altai Mountains, hundreds of miles distant. This proves Semilka functioned as a major node within an extensive continental supply chain. These people were importing raw materials from distant mountain ranges, processing them in a centralized industrial district, and then presumably exporting finished weapons, tools, and other bronze goods to communities across Eurasia. This sophisticated trade network flourished more than 1,000 years before the establishment of the famous Silk Road. The city's geographical location makes perfect strategic sense when viewed through this economic lens. It sits upon a high promontory precisely where the terrain fractures into 7 deep ravines, hence its evocative name. It commands a view over the Irtysh River, which would have served as a superhighway for boats transporting heavy cargo. From their elevated position, the inhabitants of Semillarca could monitor and control north-south river traffic, likely imposing taxes on trade or safeguarding their own commercial shipments. The metallurgical science practiced here was incredibly advanced for its time. Chemical analysis reveals the smiths of Semillarca employed a complex technique known as co-smelting. They were skillfully mixing different mineral ores to create high-quality bronze alloys with a tin content reaching up to 12%. This is not an activity undertaken by casual hobbyists. This level of consistent, high-volume production indicates the existence of a professional class of metalworkers, full-time specialists who were not engaged in farming or herding. They were supported economically by the agricultural surplus generated by the rest of the community. The excavations also provided clues regarding the cultural identity of the city's inhabitants. The majority of pottery recovered belongs to a group archaeologists term the Archaeological culture, known for its more settled lifestyle. Intriguingly, the team also discovered pottery styles associated with the Archaeological culture, a group originating from the forested regions of the Ural Mountains to the north. This mixture of ceramic traditions paints a portrait of a cosmopolitan urban center. Semillarca was likely a vibrant meeting point where forest dwellers from the north came to trade with steppe pastoralists from the south. One can envision marketplaces filled with furs, timber, and honey from the northern forests being exchanged for the high-quality bronze implements manufactured in the city's workshops. One peculiar detail has ignited scholarly debate. Despite the monumental and permanent nature of the architecture, the quantity of surface debris, broken pottery, animal bones, and general refuse is relatively low compared to contemporaneous cities in the ancient Near East. This observation has led to a fascinating theory. Perhaps Semillarca was a seasonal city. It is possible the population swelled dramatically during the summer months for large-scale trade fairs, religious festivals, and intensive metal production, then contracted during the harsh, freezing steppe winters. This suggests a uniquely adaptive way of life that does not conform neatly to our traditional categories of settled versus nomadic. It was a city constructed by a people who still felt the ancestral pull of the open plains. Dr. Radovojevic described the site as a true urban hub of the steppe. It compels a fundamental rewrite of the history books for Central Asia. It proves the nomadic tribes were not primitive peoples confined to tents because they lacked the knowledge to build walls. They possessed the technical knowledge, organizational skill, and labor capacity to construct massive, planned cities whenever they chose to do so. They simply usually elected not to. Yet at Semillarca, for reasons we are still striving to comprehend, they made a conscious decision to cease wandering and establish an industrial and economic powerhouse that would dominate the regional economy for centuries. As excavations continue into the coming year, Semillarca offers a rare opportunity to examine the engine that powered the Bronze Age in Inner Eurasia. It serves as a powerful reminder that civilization does not always manifest as stone pyramids or marble colonnades. Sometimes, it appears as earthen walls upon a lonely, wind-swept plateau, concealing the secrets of an ancient industrial superpower that we are only now beginning to understand. If you gaze out across the waters of Abu Qur Bay today, situated just a few miles east of the city of Alexandria, you will observe nothing but the blue expanse of the Mediterranean Sea. It is a quiet coastal area, shaped by waves and wind. Yet beneath the water's surface, resting in the gloom of the Sebed, lies one of the most fabled cities of the ancient world. Canopus was once the Las Vegas of antiquity. It was a city of stark contrasts, renowned simultaneously for its wild, decadent festivals and its profound mystical devotion. It was a destination where pilgrims traveled to seek healing from the gods, and where wealthy citizens of Alexandria journeyed to indulge in pleasure. For many centuries, it stood as a principal gateway to Egypt, a thriving port city filled with temples, luxurious villas, and bustling markets. Then, in a single cataclysmic moment during the 8th century of the Common Era, it vanished completely. The ground beneath it liquefied, and the entire urban settlement slid into the sea, swallowed whole by the Mediterranean. For over 1,000 years, Canopus existed solely within the written accounts of Greek and Roman historians, a spectral legend of a drowned metropolis. However, in August of the year 2025, the silt of the Nile Delta finally relinquished one of its greatest secrets. A team of underwater archaeologists, working as part of a long-term collaboration between the Egyptian Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities and the European Institute for Underwater Archaeology, announced a discovery that resurrects the city in vivid, tangible detail. During a deep-water excavation within the submerged ruins of the city's temple district, divers uncovered a colossal statue that had been buried in sediment for more than a millennium. It was a sphinx. Yet this was not carved from the limestone or sandstone typically used for such monuments. This mythological creature was sculpted from quartzite, one of the hardest stones available to the ancient world. As the divers meticulously brushed away layers of accumulated mud and marine incrustation, the sunlight filtering down from the surface illuminated the stone, revealing a pristine, polished surface that had survived the corrosive saltwater environment remarkably intact. The Sphinx bears the royal cartouche of Ramesses II, the most powerful pharaoh of the Egyptian New Kingdom. Its discovery within a city that reached its cultural and economic peak during the much later Ptolemaic period suggests it was an heirloom artifact, a sacred object of immense antiquity transported to Canopus from an older, more venerable site to bestow ancient authority and legitimacy upon a newer temple complex. Finding a quartzite statue of this monumental scale is exceptionally rare. Quartzite is notoriously difficult to carve, demanding specialized tools and artisan skills that were lost for centuries following the decline of pharaonic Egypt. To discover one resting on the sea floor, surrounded by marine life and shifting currents, is a haunting reminder of the immense wealth and artistic ambition that Canopus once commanded. But the Sphinx was not alone. Alongside the colossal statue, the team recovered a trove of ritual artifacts that cast new light upon the city's most famous religious event, the Mysteries of Osiris. To grasp the full significance of these finds, one must understand what Canopus represented to the peoples of the ancient Mediterranean world. It was the sacred final destination of an enormous, waterborne religious procession. Every year during the month of Koyak, priests from the neighboring port city of Thonis, Heraclean would place a cult statue of the god Osiris onto a specially consecrated ceremonial barge. In a grand, torchlit flotilla, they would sail the divine image down the interconnected canals that linked the two cities, symbolically reenacting the god's mythic journey to the underworld. When the sacred barge finally arrived in Canopus, the celebration transformed. It became a profound festival encapsulating themes of death and resurrection, communal mourning, and collective ecstasy. The artifacts recovered this year provide the first physical, archaeological evidence of the specific rituals performed inside the secrecy of the temple precincts. Divers retrieved ceremonial ladles crafted from bronze and silver, used to pour libations of wine and water over the divine image. They discovered offering tables still bearing the petrified remains of votive offerings. Most intriguingly, they found a series of objects known as Osiris beds. These were stone or precious metal molds shaped into the silhouette of the recumbent god. During the festival rites, priests would fill these molds with a fertile mixture of soil and barley grain. They would ritually water this god until the grain sprouted, creating a living, verdant image of Osiris. This was a powerful agricultural symbol of life triumphantly rising from death, mirroring the annual life-giving flooding of the Nile River that sustained Egyptian civilization. Discovering these delicate ritual objects amidst the chaotic wreckage of a sunken city is nothing short of miraculous. It allows modern scholars to reconstruct the sensory and emotional experience of the ancient festival. We can imagine the heavy scent of incense permeating the air, the rhythmic sound of sistrum rattles, and the sight of thousands of devout pilgrims lining the canal banks, waiting in anticipation for the god's sacred vessel to pass. The discovery also underscores the intrinsic duality of Canopus. While priests conducted these solemn, esoteric rites within the temple sanctuary, the streets and waterways outside hosted a very different kind of celebration. Ancient writers like Strabo described the canal journey to Canopus as a scene of non-stop revelry, with flute players and dancers performing on boats crowded with festive participants. It was a place of sanctioned excess where the strict social conventions of traditional Egyptian society were temporarily relaxed. The Sphinx of Ramesses II, a symbol of timeless pharaonic order, likely stood witness to scenes of sensual debauchery that would have profoundly shocked his original, conservative New Kingdom court. The recovery of these artifacts also forces us to confront the terrifying geological reality of the city's demise. Canopus did not merely fall into gradual ruin. It was destroyed instantaneously by a natural phenomenon known as soil liquefaction. The city was constructed upon the soft, water-saturated clay deposits of the Nile Delta. When a massive earthquake struck in the 8th century, the seemingly solid ground transformed into a fluid slurry. The immense weight of the stone temple statues and obelisks caused them to sink directly into the liquefied mud, dragging the entire urban fabric down with them. The condition of the newly discovered Sphinx narrates this story of sudden violence. It was found toppled onto its side, partially buried within a chaotic layer of debris that indicates a rapid, catastrophic collapse. It was not carefully interred or ritually dismantled. It was violently thrown down by the convulsing earth itself. Ironically, the fact that it remains so well preserved is a direct consequence of this disaster. The liquid mud that engulfed the city also formed a protective seal around its contents, shielding the stone from centuries of marine erosion and potential human looting. Now, thanks to this landmark discovery, we possess the actual tools the ancient priests used. We have the statues before which they prayed. We have the image of the god King Ramesses, carved in eternal quartzite, forever watching over a city that physically exists no more. As these artifacts undergo a meticulous process of desalination and conservation in the laboratories of Alexandria, they will eventually take their place on display within the Grand Egyptian Museum. Yet their truest, most profound context will always be the twilight world of Abu Qir Bay, where the overwhelming majority of Canopus still lies submerged, silently awaiting the next investigative dive. Deep within the foothills of the Andes Mountains in the eastern region of Ecuador lies the Apano Valley. This is an area characterized by extremely dense vegetation and steep terrain, long presenting a formidable challenge for archaeologists attempting to conduct ground surveys on foot. For many decades, researchers were aware that ancient peoples had inhabited this valley, having discovered pottery fragments and creating basic maps of earthen mounds concealed beneath the thick undergrowth. However, the sheer impenetrability of the forest made it impossible to perceive the complete, overarching picture of human settlement until now. In a major study highlighted prominently this year, a research team led by archaeologist T.A. Fenrostain from the French National Center for Scientific Research employed LIDAR technology. This remote sensing method digitally removes the tree canopy from aerial imagery. Their findings, published in the prestigious journal Science, revealed what lay hidden underneath, not merely a collection of scattered, isolated villages, but a dense and sophisticated urban network spanning more than 100 square miles. The laser scans revealed over 6,000 earthen platforms arranged in precise geometric patterns. These were definitively not natural formations. They were the foundational bases for houses and ceremonial structures constructed by a lost civilization that began to flourish in this region around 500 years before the Common Era. The sheer magnitude of these earthworks is difficult to fully comprehend from a ground-level perspective. The researchers identified rectangular platforms measuring approximately 40 feet in width and up to 10 feet in height. These were deliberately built up from the valley floor to create dry, stable foundations for wooden superstructures which have, over the millennia, completely rotted away. The platforms were systematically arranged around central plaza areas, strongly indicating a highly organized society with clearly defined residential neighborhoods and dedicated civic centers. Some of the largest architectural complexes would have required the movement of thousands of tons of earth, fundamentally reshaping the natural topography to suit the inhabitants' needs. Perhaps the most impressive discovery was the extensive infrastructure connecting these various settlements. The cities were linked by an intricate network of straight, wide roads. The largest of these roadways measured 30 feet across and extended for miles, cutting through the landscape with a geometric precision that implies centralized planning and coordinated labor. These were not meandering foot trails, but engineered highways designed to accommodate significant traffic, suggesting a bustling internal trade network and constant interaction between the different urban centers. The remarkable straightness of these roads is particularly notable, as it required the builders to perform extensive landscape modification, digging through hills and filling in ravines to maintain their direct course. The spaces between the residential settlements were filled with organized agricultural fields, drained by an extensive system of canals and ditches. This sophisticated hydrology allowed the inhabitants to expertly manage water flow in a region prone to heavy tropical rainfall. They cultivated the soil, growing staple crops like maize and manioc on a scale sufficient to support a population numbering in the tens of thousands. The overall landscape was essentially a continuous, integrated web of residential areas and productive farmland. The researchers described this model as a garden city, where the traditional boundary between the urban and the rural was deliberately blurred. We understand that two distinct cultural groups sequentially occupied this valley. The Quilemote people first settled the area around 500 years before the Common Era. They were followed later by the Opano culture, which inhabited these sites until approximately 600 years after the Common Era began. Together, these societies occupied and transformed this region for well over 1,000 years, creating a built environment that was almost entirely artificial. The pottery recovered from the site suggests a culture rich in artistic expression and ritual practice. Evidence indicates the consumption of maize beer and participation in complex social and ceremonial gatherings. Population estimates for the Opano Valley at its zenith are significant. Based on the number of residential platforms, researchers believe the area supported a population of at least 10,000 people, and potentially as many as 30,000 during its peak. To provide a meaningful comparison, this is roughly equivalent to the estimated population of Roman-era London. This strongly suggests the Amazon basin was fully capable of supporting large, complex, sedentary societies many centuries before the arrival of European explorers. The primary reason these vast urban complexes remained concealed for so long is fundamentally simple. The people of the Apano Valley constructed their world using the most abundant resource available to them, Earth. Unlike contemporaneous civilizations like the Maya or the Inca, who left behind enduring stone monuments that survived the centuries, structures built from mud and compacted soil inevitably erode and vanish beneath relentless jungle regrowth. Without the penetrating eye of LIDAR technology, these massive complexes appear as nothing more than natural, vegetated hills to the unaided human eye. This landmark discovery adds a crucial, missing piece to the evolving puzzle of pre-Columbian South America. It demonstrates that complex urbanism was not confined to the high Andes or the Pacific coast, but extended deep into the previously underestimated tropical lowlands. The Apano Valley was a thriving, meticulously engineered landscape where human societies had achieved a comprehensive mastery over their challenging environment. As airborne scanning technology continues to improve and its application expands, it is highly likely we will discover this was not an isolated anomaly, but merely one part of a far wider, previously hidden network of settlements lying silently beneath the vast Amazonian canopy. Within the genealogical record of ancient Egypt's 18th dynasty, the celebrated Golden Age of the New Kingdom, there has persistently existed a significant absence. We know the titanic figures of this era intimately. We know Thutmose I, the conqueror who expanded the empire's borders to the Euphrates River. We know Hatshepsut, the woman who proclaimed herself pharaoh and governed with unparalleled authority. And we know Thutmose III, hailed as the Napoleon of Egypt, whose military genius solidified Egyptian supremacy for a full century. Yet positioned between these colossal historical personalities was a king who seemed to fade into obscurity, Thutmose II. For more than 100 years, Egyptologists have largely regarded him as little more than a transitional figure. He was the physically frail husband of the ambitious Hatshepsut and the father of the formidable Thutmose VII. His reign lasted perhaps 15 years, yet his historical legacy has been predominantly defined by his relationships to the more renowned individuals surrounding him. His mummified body was discovered in 1881, part of the famed royal cache at Deir el-Bahari, where priests of the 21st dynasty had hidden the remains of great pharaohs to protect them from systematic tomb robbers. However, unlike his father or his son, his original purpose-built tomb had never been located. He stood as the sole pharaoh of the entire 18th dynasty, whose final resting place remained an empty space on the archaeological map. This changed decisively in the year 2025, with a discovery heralded as among the most significant since Howard Carter unsealed the tomb of Tutankhamun. A joint Egyptian and British archaeological mission announced they had finally identified the lost tomb of this missing pharaoh. Led by Dr. Piers Litherland of the New Kingdom Research Foundation, the team did not locate it within the main, well-trodden branch of the Valley of the Kings frequented by tourists. They discovered it within the rugged, desolate cliffs of the western Wadis, remote desert valleys few visitors ever witness. The archaeological detective work that culminated in this find was brilliant in its methodical logic. Dr. Litherland and his team hypothesized that Thutmose II would not have been interred alongside the later Ramesside kings within the main valley. Instead, they examined the established burial patterns of his immediate family. The tombs belonging to the wives of Thutmose III had previously been found within the steep, treacherous ravines of Wadi Gabanat el-Karud. It follows logically that the father's tomb might be situated near the burial place of his son's family. For multiple field seasons, the team contended with the harsh, unforgiving terrain, manually clearing tons of fallen limestone debris and enduring the region's extreme heat. Their steadfast perseverance was ultimately rewarded when they uncovered a rock-cut entrance that had been completely buried for millennia. The site was cataloged as Tomb C4. Initially, the tomb's architecture proved confusing. It did not resemble the grand, sprawling hypogea typical of the later New Kingdom period. It was architecturally simpler, a single descending corridor leading to a burial chamber. Yet, as archaeologists meticulously cleared the accumulated rubble, the material evidence began to speak compellingly. They discovered fragments of decorative plaster that were unmistakably royal in nature. These fragments bore depictions from the Book of the Amduat, the ancient Egyptian funerary text that guided the pharaoh's soul through the 12 perilous hours of the night. The walls would have originally been brilliantly painted with blue hieroglyphic inscriptions and yellow stars, a sacred map of the underworld designed to ensure the king's successful resurrection. The conclusive evidence, however, materialized in the form of stone vessels. The team recovered a collection of fine alabaster jars, containers used to hold sacred oils or perhaps the king's removed internal organs. When they carefully cleaned the surfaces of these vessels, they found the royal Kardach of Thutmose Sue. But they discovered something else as well, a detail that subtly alters our understanding of the period's complex power dynamics. Inscribed directly alongside the king's name was the name of his great royal wife, Hatshepsut. This physical link, carved in stone and sealed within darkness for 3,500 years, offers a fascinating window into their political and personal relationship. Conventional historical narratives have often portrayed Hatshepsut as a usurper, a stepmother who seized power from the young Thutmose Asuri following her husband's demise. Yet the presence of her name on the funerary equipment prepared for Thutmose Sukhiu suggests a potentially different story. It implies a recognized partnership, or at the very least, a respectful and sanctioned transition of power. It shows Hatshepsut actively fulfilling her formal duties as the pious royal widow, orchestrating her husband's burial with the finest goods the empire could furnish. This evidence suggests her eventual rise to sole rulership may have been less an abrupt coup and more a calculated, evolutionary process that commenced either during the final years of his reign or immediately upon his death. The discovery of the tomb also provides a clear answer as to why it remained lost for so many centuries. The Western Wadas are notoriously prone to violent, sudden flash floods. The excavation team found definitive evidence that shortly after the king's original burial, a massive torrent of water and mud had catastrophically breached the tomb's entrance. These floodwaters would have smashed any wooden furniture, scattered precious metals, and filled the chambers with a concrete-like slurry of debris. In an ironic twist, this ancient disaster proved to be a blessing in disguise for preservation. While it destroyed all perishable organic materials, the linens, wooden objects, and floral offerings, it also hermetically sealed the tomb. The hardened mud effectively protected the remaining stone artifacts from the systematic tomb robbers who plundered the Valley of the Kings toward the end of the Bronze Age. Although Thutmose Sea's mummy was later removed by priests for safekeeping, the architectural shell of his intended afterlife remained startlingly intact. Locating this tomb represents the placement of the final piece in the 18th dynasty puzzle. We now possess knowledge of the burial locations for the entire Thutmoside royal line. This allows scholars to trace the precise evolution of royal tomb architecture from the simpler, hidden cliff tombs of the dynasty's founders to the grand, complex subterranean tunnels of the later Ramesside period. The tomb of Thutmose Siri embodies a crucial transitional moment, a direct architectural link between the empire's vigorous foundation and its subsequent zenith of power. Furthermore, this discovery invites a long overdue revaluation of the king himself. Historians tend to assess pharaohs by the scale of their monuments or the tally of their military victories. Because Thutmose I had a relatively brief reign and was historically positioned between two monumental rulers, he has often been summarily dismissed. However, the quality of the grave goods found within his tomb, the fine alabaster, the evidence of elaborate painted wall decorations strongly suggests a king who commanded immense economic resources and profound respect from his court. He was not a minor or insignificant figure to his contemporaries. He was the living Horus, the legitimate ruler of the two lands. This discovery also underscores the evolving nature of modern Egyptology. The era of finding a sealed doorway, breaking through, and gazing upon untouched treasures gleaming in torchlight is largely concluded. Today, the field's greatest breakthroughs frequently arise from revisiting overlooked spaces. The forgotten wadis, the debris piles left by earlier excavators, and the seemingly empty areas on the map. It comes from reinterpreting the landscape with a geologist's analytical eye, comprehending where flash floods would have flowed and which cliff faces might conceal a hidden secret. As the excavation of Tom C4 continues, the research team maintains hope of uncovering additional artifacts. The consolidated flood debris may yet conceal smaller objects, Ushabti figures, fragments of jewelry, or perhaps even foundation deposits that could clarify the precise chronological length of his reign. But even if no further objects are recovered, the identification and confirmation of Tom C4 stands as a monumental triumph. It restores Pharaoh Thutmose II to his rightful place within the sacred landscape of the Theban necropolis. And through the scattered debris of his long-lost tomb, we are finally beginning to perceive the true stature of the man who historically stood in the shadow of a queen. While archaeologists in Alexandria were bringing submerged relics to light, geneticists working in the southern reaches of South America were uncovering a lost chapter of humanity. For many decades, the established narrative explaining how humans populated the Americas appeared relatively clear. The prevailing theory held that after crossing the Bering Land Bridge, migrating groups spread rapidly from north to south, eventually diversifying into the ancestral populations of the indigenous peoples known today. However, in November of the year 2025, a new study published in the scientific journal Nature revealed that the genetic family tree of South America is far more intricate and carries a far more tragic weight than previously understood. A vast international research consortium, led by Javier Moravel Lopez from Harvard University, conducted a comprehensive analysis of DNA extracted from 238 ancient individuals whose remains were recovered from Argentina, Chile, and Brazil. These genetic samples spanned an immense chronological period of 10,000 years, ranging from the earliest hunter-gatherer societies to the era of initial European contact. As the scientists sequenced the complete genomes, they identified something profoundly unexpected. Concealed within the genetic code of ancient skeletons from the Pampas region of central Argentina was a distinct DNA signature that did not match any known modern indigenous population in the Americas. It was a ghost lineage, a separate branch of the human family that had diverged from the main migratory wave thousands of years earlier and subsequently evolved in near total genetic isolation. To comprehend why this discovery is so extraordinary, one must consider the geography. The Pampas constitutes a vast, fertile grassland extending across central Argentina, analogous to the Great Plains of North America. It is open, accessible terrain, relatively easy to traverse, and historically rich in natural resources. Typically, when human populations inhabit such an unobstructed landscape, they interact extensively. People engage in trade, form marriage alliances, and migrate. Genetic material flows freely across such plains like water. Yet, this ghost population remained genetically distinct and separate. The data indicates this was not a small, marginal group, but a substantial population that thrived within these grasslands for nearly 5,000 years. They first appeared discernibly in the archaeological record approximately 8,500 years ago and persist until roughly 1,000 years ago. During that immense span of time, a period longer than the entire recorded history of ancient Egypt, they maintained a genetic distinctiveness that is almost without parallel in the broader story of human prehistory. While complex civilizations rose and declined in the Andes Mountains to the west and within the Amazon basin to the north, this group remained apart, forming a genetic island within a sea of continental movement. Archaeological evidence provides a partial glimpse into the lives of these people. We know from excavated sites like Arroyo Seco II and Laguna Chica that they were highly adapted hunter-gatherers. During the earliest periods, they coexisted with the last survivors of the Ice Age megafauna. Archaeologists have discovered their characteristic stone tools in direct association with the bones of giant ground sloths and Native American horses. They crafted distinctive weaponry, including the famous fishtail projectile points and later, the tiger points found at locations like Paso Otero 4. However, as the global climate shifted, so did their environment. Approximately 6,000 years ago, the region entered a climatic phase known as the mid-Holocene hypsothermal. The climate grew significantly drier and more hostile. The megafauna vanished, and the lush grasslands transformed into a browner, more arid landscape. Many contemporaneous human groups across South America abandoned the drying interiors during this era, retreating to the wetter coastal zones or the more stable mountain valleys. Remarkably, the ghost lineage stayed. They adapted to the harsh new ecological reality. They shifted their primary dietary focus from giant mammals to the guanaco, a wild relative of the llama, and the rhea, a large, flightless bird. They developed novel hunting technologies to pursue this faster, smaller game, including the bolidoras weights made of stone connected by leather cords that could be thrown to entangle the legs of running animals. Archaeologists find these polished stone spheres within their graves, symbolic of their refined survival strategy. They also treated their deceased with extraordinary care and ritual complexity. At burial sites in the eastern Pampas, archaeologists have discovered intricate graves where skeletal remains were painted with red ochre. In some instances, they practiced secondary burial rites, where the body was allowed to decompose naturally before the bones were carefully cleaned, bundled together, and re-interred within a communal tomb. This suggests a society possessing deep ancestral reverence and elaborate ritual beliefs concerning the afterlife. Despite this evident cultural resilience and sophistication, they remain genetically isolated. The genomic data reveals almost no evidence of intermarriage or genetic admixture with the contemporary peoples of the Andes or the tropical forests to the north. For 5,000 years, they existed within a world of their own making, separated from the rest of the continent, not by insurmountable physical barriers like mountains or oceans, but by some invisible cultural or territorial boundary that modern science still does not fully comprehend. Then, around 1,000 years ago, their genetic signal abruptly vanished from the archaeological record. In the centuries immediately preceding the arrival of Europeans, the demographic composition of the region changed dramatically. New genetic markers, originating from populations in the Andes and the Amazon, begin to appear, suggesting a powerful wave of migration, expansion, or conquest that either replaced or fully absorbed the isolated ghost people. By the time Spanish explorers arrived in the 16th century, the indigenous groups they encountered, such as the Quirandi, were genetically distinct from the ancient inhabitants who had once hunted giant ground sloths across the same plains. What precipitated their disappearance? The timing coincides broadly with the medieval warm period, an epoch of climatic change that might have enabled expanding populations from the north to push southward into the grasslands. It is plausible they were overwhelmed by novel epidemic diseases introduced through distant contacts, displaced by more numerous incoming groups, or simply assimilated so completely through intermarriage that their unique genetic signature was diluted beyond detection within a few generations. The disappearance of this entire lineage adds a profoundly haunting dimension to the history of the Americas. The ghost lineage represents, in a sense, a failed evolutionary and cultural experiment, a branch of humanity's family tree that flourished in isolation for thousands of years but was ultimately pruned away. Entire peoples, with their own unique languages, songs, creation myths, and collective memories, vanished without leaving a single trace in written history. We do not know what they called themselves. We do not know what language they spoke. We do not know which deities they venerated. We know they existed solely because of minute fragments of DNA preserved within the mineralized dust of their ancient bones. This discovery fundamentally challenges the oversimplified, single-wave theory of the people of the Americas. It implies the settlement of South America was a far more dynamic, braided, and at times violent process. There were likely multiple separate pulses of human movement, with groups periodically splitting apart, becoming isolated, thriving for millennia, and in some tragic cases dying out entirely. Now, thanks to paleogenomics, they have reclaimed a place in the grand narrative. They are the lost people of the Pampas. As scientists continue to sequence more ancient genomes from across the continents, it is highly probable we will identify further ghost lineages of lost cousins who walked the earth long before our time, leaving behind no monuments or writings, but only the silent, enduring code within their DNA. For the majority of the discoveries on our list, we have been excavating within the earth. We have explored the dense mud of jungle valleys, the shifting sands of Egypt, and the deep silt of the ocean floor. However, our final discovery from the year 2025 demonstrates that occasionally the most significant historical treasures are not buried underground. They are concealed in full view, waiting to be recognized. The Magna Carta is arguably the most famous legal document in the Western world. Sealed by King John at Runnymede in the year 1215, it established the foundational principle that everyone, including the monarch, is subject to the law. It forms the bedrock of modern democratic concepts, influencing documents ranging from the United States Constitution to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Due to its immense historical fame, we tend to assume every surviving copy is already accounted for, securely housed within high-security vaults in institutions like the British Library, Oxford University, or the National Archives in Washington, D.C. Yet in 2025, a researcher working within the archival collections of Harvard University discovered one that the wider world had completely forgotten. The document in question is an original issuance of the Magna Carta authorized in the year 1300 by King Edward I. While the 1215 version is the most historically celebrated, it was initially a failed peace treaty that was annulled by papal authority almost immediately. It was the subsequent reissues by Kings Henry III and Edward that permanently enshrined the principles of the Great Charter into English statutory law. The 1300 version holds particular importance because it represents the final occasion the charter was formally confirmed under the royal seal as a standalone legal instrument. It symbolizes the precise moment when the radical ideas of 1215 transitioned into the permanent, governing law of the realm. So how did a priceless artifact of such global significance become lost within a university library? The story serves as a profound lesson in the fragility of institutional memory. The charter had been donated to Harvard University in the early 20th century by a wealthy alumnus. At the time of the donation, it was likely received with appropriate fanfare. However, across the ensuing decades, through changes in cataloging systems, administrative turnover, and perhaps a simple clerical oversight, its true significance was gradually erased. It was mislabeled. It resided in a drawer or storage box, possibly cataloged under a generic description such as medieval deed or legal manuscript, its monumental identity concealed by an inadequate and vague descriptor. It was not until a historian conducting a systematic survey of the university's medieval legal collections decided to examine this misidentified item more closely that the truth was finally unveiled. As they carefully unfolded the parchment, they observed the distinctive handwriting style of the royal chancery scribes. They identified the wax seal of King Edward I. They realized they were not holding a simple property deed. They were holding the birth certificate of the rule of law itself. This form of discovery is known as archival archaeology. It is the realization that our great museums and libraries are so vast, so densely packed with millions of objects accumulated over centuries, that we often do not fully comprehend what we possess. During the 18th and 19th centuries, wealthy private collectors and major institutions frequently purchased artifacts and documents by the crate load. They did not always possess the specialized expertise to accurately identify their acquisitions, and they did not always maintain meticulous records. A curator might catalog a sword as Roman when it is actually Celtic. A librarian might classify a manuscript as a generic religious text when it is, in fact, a lost scientific treatise. The Harvard Magna Carta stands as a powerful symbol of this dark data. Experts estimate that within major global institutions like the British Museum, the Smithsonian, or the Vatican Apostolic Archive, only a small percentage of the total collection is ever on public display or even fully digitized and studied. The remainder sits in climate-controlled storage, silently awaiting a researcher to pose the correct question or to open the long-sealed right box. This discovery forces us to confront a paradoxical reality. We are losing touch with history as rapidly as we are uncovering it in the field. For every lost city we map with aerial laser scanning, there is a fragile document slowly crumbling in a basement archive because no one is aware of its existence. For every royal tomb we unseal in Egypt, there is a crate of artifacts from a 1920s excavation that has never been unpacked, sitting forgotten in a storage warehouse in London or New York. If a document as famously iconic as the Magna Carta could become lost within one of the world's most prestigious and well-funded universities, what other priceless items are still hiding in the darkness? What lost plays by Shakespeare might exist? What maps were drafted by ancient explorers? What technical blueprints for forgotten machines are sitting on a shelf at this very moment, tragically labeled miscellaneous? The year 2025 has illustrated that the past is not a static, completed entity. It is not dead. It is dynamic and continually evolving. It is reinterpreted every time we activate a LiDAR scanner, every time we sequence an ancient genome, and every time we open a dusty, neglected box in a library basement. From the ghost lineages of South America to the sealed vaults of Hungary, from the sunken temples of Canopus to the mislabeled shelves of Harvard, the unifying message of this remarkable year is unequivocally clear. We have only just begun to scratch the surface. Our planet still conceals lost cities, our oceans still guard lost ships, and our own great archives still hold lost words. The field of archaeology and historical discovery transforms every single day. We are aware that discoveries are occurring at this very moment, which did not make this compilation, simply because they have not yet been publicly announced. Now, we are eager to hear your perspective. Did we overlook a major archaeological find from this past year that captivated your imagination? Is there a significant local discovery from your own region of the world that you believe deserves greater global attention? Please share your thoughts, insights, and suggestions in the comment section below. If you have enjoyed this profound exploration into the hidden layers of our world's history, please consider showing your support by liking this video and subscribing to the ForbiddenFathoms channel. Your engagement is vital. It helps us sustain our work and continue funding future investigative expeditions. Thank you, as always, for joining us on this journey. This has been ForbiddenFathoms, and until our next exploration into the unknown, stay inquisitive.